Live now. It'll take a couple seconds, and I'm going to hit record starting now as well.
All right. Well, first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody out there to the October 19th, 2020 meeting of the Broadband Task Force. And today's meeting is really to just go over several bills. We're first going to do an update on the Connect Wyoming program. And then after that, we'll get right into the bills. And so first thing, Brian, maybe you could take the roll.
Sure thing, Mr. Chairman. Senator Dockstader.
Here.
Senator Landon.
Here.
Senator Von Flater.
Senator, I believe you're muted, but I think we see you. So
I am here.
Speaker Harshman.
Here.
Representative Lindholm.
Here.
Ms. Hardesty.
Here.
Ms. Shainfeld.
Lauren, are you in? Excused. She'll pop up here in a minute.
Ms. Sessions.
Here.
Chairman Summers.
Here.
Quorum is present, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thanks, Brian. And thanks for all your work on these bills and everything. We really appreciate all the work staff does for us behind the scenes. It's been amazing this interim, just amazing. With that, I guess we'll go to our first agenda item, and which is the Connect Wyoming Broadband Initiatives update. And Rob Krieger is going to be on for that. So Rob, please take it over.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
I can, thank you.
Good deal. Well, Mr. Chairman, members of the task force, my name is Rob Krieger. I serve as Governor Gordon's business and economic advisor. I'll be fairly brief today. Just a quick update for Connect Wyoming. As you all know, we deployed roughly 55 million. As you guys know, this deadline that Congress put in place made it a little difficult for us and providers to make sure we were going to hit that deadline. But those that felt confident in their projects were to the tune of 55 million. The governor had set aside 100 million of CARES money for this, and should Congress extend that December deadline, we would like to deploy the rest of those funds for this initiative. For next steps, I know there's a draft bill that has part of this in there, and we've already done a little bit of the education, the Wi-Fi routers and parking lots for education. But we put a survey out, the Department of Ed did last week, to also see with the school districts again who would need this and who wouldn't. And what came back was roughly 72 buildings thus far, to the tune of roughly $288,000. So we'll get those finalized, run them through the process, and get that money out to those school districts that need that for those buildings. To the telehealth carts in the school districts, we're also surveying school districts to see the necessity and the number of schools that would need that. And that's still being surveyed as we speak. So hopefully by the end of the week, we'll have a better feel for that, as well as CARES Act compliance on it, to make sure that all is good. And really, Mr. Chairman, that's kind of all I got for you this morning. I don't know if I can stand for question now or turn it over to Ryan, whatever you would like.
So Rob, I think just hang on, but I'd like to bring Ryan in and let Ryan kind of tell us what he wants to tell us with regard to that. And then I have a question or two, and maybe the committee does as well. Go ahead, Ryan. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, task force members. I'm Ryan Kudrow with the Wyoming Business Council, serving as their broadband manager. Don't really have a lot to tell, but yet not a lot to tell. After the awards, all the awardees got started building the fiber and towers, etc. We've seen so far, we've been able to see invoices from every awardee at this point. So things are definitely moving along. We're past the 60-day mark, and as a high level, not to bother these folks doing the good work they do, but there's several 100,000 feet of conduit and fiber that have already been installed. There's been multiple towers that have been installed from the Star Valley all the way over to the Wyoming line, or the Nebraska-Wyoming line. and definitely north into the Shell Valley and some of the other areas of concern. So the good work's getting done. Excuse me. Starting to get out there, and we'll start documenting and taking video of some of the progress, and at some point put that up for everyone to see kind of how this has been able to impact broadband across Wyoming, as well as help stimulate some of the economies in this current trend. And then I really don't have a lot more than that. So again, if you have any questions or thoughts, I am willing to stand for those as well. Thank you.
Rob, this is probably a question for you. As you know, there's been a little bit of controversy around whether there's been some overbuild in certain areas, and because of the money we put out. First of all, I want to say thank you for putting it out there. I think you made a great effort in a short amount of time, and were there a few challenges perhaps, but I think it's incumbent upon me and us in this task force to kind of ask you where you're at with regard to those concerns, and whether going forward, as we look at maybe another 45 million, if we get an extension, how you will address those concerns in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And there has been a little bit of that. It seems that, we've talked through, Ryan has, as well as other folks at the Business Council, with those providers who feel they were overbuilt. And I think we all came to a pretty good agreement and left the meetings feeling okay. I think, we used the FCC maps, which is what the federal government uses, as you guys know, to grant money, whether that's RDOF or what have you. And so we felt comfortable this being federal money. Again, the timeline we were on, that was the best, most public map we could use to point to and say, okay, on this census block, it shows that you're not serving at this speeds, therefore it's underserved or unserved, and we're going to try to fill it. So there was a little bit of controversy, you're right, but I do think we cleared that up with those providers. Moving forward, though, to your question about if we reopen this down the road, I think a challenge process would be good. I think something we could do to at least tell those folks that, look, this is the map we're using. Make sure your data is into the FCC so it's as up to date as possible. And again, it would kind of be dependent on the time frame that Congress would lay out, because we do have to do this quickly. And as you are all aware, the protest and that period can linger on for a while. So Ryan, I know you've been in those meetings as well, but yeah, that's what I have.
And thanks for that, Rob. And I guess and Ryan and Rob both, I think, when the original law went in place that established the broadband coordinator and the council, one of the primary missions, and I've been involved in that, is mapping, and the struggle we've had getting maps, primarily because, I'll be honest, I think, and Barbara can speak up if I'm incorrect on this, primarily because providers really haven't provided all of that information. Some of it's proprietary. I think in the end, I think that proprietary information needs to be public, because we all need to know where everything is. The federal government hands out money. They have to have a map. That's a public map. There's no private map for them. And so I think if nothing else, maybe this will emphasize to industry that we need to get that all of their connections out there on a map. And Barbara, are you able to speak to this issue at all?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between submitting proprietary information and just flat out showing where you have facilities. Maybe one without the other. If I tell you I have transport fiber going down the interstate, that's different than telling you what the count is, what the electronics are. I don't think that you necessarily need to know that, but the fact that I have facilities there, or transport or distribution, I don't see that as a big issue.
And Barbara, just going forward, and I know you're on the Broadband Advisory Council, but can you work with Ryan on this issue, and let's get it figured out. Let's get it figured out between industry and the state so we can get this mapping done. And I think I'll be honest, Robin, it's probably going to make some people mad, is maybe this is the only way. If we put some projects out there and we overlap a few people, maybe it will be the stimulus to get this work done. And so I just encourage all of you broadband providers out there, let's figure out, let's work with Ryan and figure out a way to get these maps as correct and honest and accurate as we can, so we don't have any confusion or overbuild when we do projects in the future, if we're lucky enough to do projects in the future. And we'll see some of that in that one bill where we tried to make the challenge process a little better. So are you up for that, Barbara?
You bet.
All right, thanks. Does anybody have any questions of Rob or Ryan from the committee? Senator Landon, please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Rob and Ryan, I appreciate you guys very much on this front. I've learned a lot. My question is, if you can kind of give us an indication of where we're lacking and where we'd like to go, and what, if we can get some more money laid down, what are the targets? Each one of us who serve in the legislature get stopped on the street and things brought up with regard to geography and, gosh, I can't get any service here or there, or where do you guys see as the targets coming up?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, I'll just touch briefly on sort of a thought we had for if we release this initiative again, should Congress extend that deadline. One, to mitigate any overlapping again, but we know areas, and I'll kind of look to Ryan on this one, but areas in the state that for sure are unserved or underserved. So I think there could be a way to, I don't know if it's an RFP process or us to essentially say, instead of just opening up for what the areas would, or what providers would want to serve, we essentially would pick the area that we know is underserved or unserved and put it out to RFP process to see if we can hit that. But as to the areas we know that are still inadequate, I would have to turn to Ryan on that one.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon. Yeah, it still is. While we were able to take care of several spots, I guess if you look at it through this initiative, there's still there's still backhaul issues in the Northeast. There's still distribution issues across the state, as far as, we've got service here, but not 5 miles away. And now that we've been able to address a lot of that, we can see that, but now is a little more getting out there and verifying, okay, yes, this is an area that there's 50 homes in this 25 square mile area that doesn't have anything, or there's one home in a 50 square mile area that doesn't have anything, and then trying to identify, as Rob mentioned, whether to put that out as an RFP on our end, or like the current process, work through local governments, local entities to get that partnership built to be able to move that forward. And then just in May, we were able to release the RFP guidelines that Crook County started with as well. So with the contacts I've made since Connect Wyoming, that's the process I've been leading everybody towards for right now. But yeah, and going forward is, again, as Rob said, move it more to kind of a top 10 list of these are the areas we'd like to hit and why, and then as more come in, just keep adding to the list, and then providers can identify what they can reach easily on their own, and what we can help them with.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And Rob and Ryan, on that, just a note before I ask us for any other questions of you guys. One thing, and I think Speaker Harshman has talked about this, he walks around trying to find a signal, and he's not very far out of Casper. And sometimes I think what we overlook are areas within these cities, even, or at the margins of city, and we assume that everything is covered there because it's after all a populated area. And we may or may not be serving that. And then the other thing, and I know this gets even stickier, and that's kind of why we were trying to figure out some community areas, is how do we, and I think this is a question, I think, and Lauren, I see Lauren's kind of on now, and for the Broadband Council, rather than maybe this task force, is how do we get to those people that are maybe can't afford internet right now? You know, and how do we make sure that they stay connected, can get connected? A lot of libraries allow that connection. Do we have enough of that? Is there a way we could survey, find out if that is a problem, isn't a problem? I think that needs to be, I think more investigation needs to happen to find out. We don't need to fix a problem if it doesn't exist. That's one of my biggest pet peeves in the legislature, is trying to fix people trying to fix problems that don't exist, right? So I think if there's one thing I would ask you and Ryan is, on that note of, is there a population segment that we are not serving? How do we find out if that exists? And so that's the one charge I would throw back to the council and to you, Rob, and you, Ryan, to try to do. Are there any other questions of Rob and Ryan? If not, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your time. And Brian, I see we have public comment on this agenda item, but I'm not sure, Brian, that I see anybody that was going to speak to this agenda item.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't have anyone who was scheduled for this item.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Brian. So with that, I think we will go to the next agenda item, which is the Broadband Development Program, and that is 21 LSO 0200 version 0.6, Broadband Development Program amendments. And Brian, I think what I'll do is turn this over to you. Maybe you can go through, you know, we've had a few different versions of this, and we kind of had a little work group maybe you could just go through all of that, who was involved, and just so everybody kind of knows what went on. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. So members of the committee, 21 LSO 200, you should have draft 0.6. And this is the first draft that the task force as a whole has looked at. A working group that was appointed at last month's meeting, Chairman Summers, Ms. Shainfeld, and Ms. Sessions, along with Senator Landon, worked on this bill draft over the course of that month to basically get it to where it's at right now. In summary, this bill draft amends the existing.
Brian, you know, and just to note, we also brought in from industry, I believe Liz Zerga and Jody Levin were also involved in that, just so folks know.
Yep. My apologies, Mr. Chairman. That is correct. In summary, this bill draft amends the existing broadband development program. It's the program that we discussed at the last meeting and highlighted a number of different considerations and provisions in that program for the working group to explore in drafting this bill. It addresses middle mile projects that are through this program and provides separate provisions and requirements for those types of projects. It amends speed requirements, clarifies and amends the challenge process during the application. It amends and repeals certain application requirements, and it specifies additional funding priorities for projects that are funded under this article. So jumping into the bill, page 2, line 7, this is a new section that goes into the broadband development program and is for middle mile projects. And it provides that middle mile projects can be funded and the other requirements that are throughout the article apply except as otherwise specified in this section. So what this subsection A says on page 2 is that the council cannot fund middle mile projects under this article unless the following conditions are met. So line 14 first, there can be no middle mile infrastructure or functional equivalent in the proposed geographic area that would be served by the project. Line 19, the project does not result in any overbuild. Moving on to page 3, the project on line 1, the project enables basically last mile broadband service for end users or end user devices. Line 6, on page 3, the provider agrees to ensure that access to any infrastructure created or improved by the project is provided to other broadband providers at reasonable rates. And then in tandem with that, the provider will agree to allow the business council to participate in arbitration of determining reasonable rates in the event of any dispute between providers as they negotiate access to whatever project or infrastructure is constructed through the project. And then the provider would agree to provide to the business council, upon the council's request, any marketing information based on current leases to assist in the determination of reasonable rates as in terms of this arbitration. The language on page 3, line 13 through the top of page 4 is based on the right-of-way contract that YDOT has. So that's where that language comes from. That was a point of emphasis in the working group as it considered and worked on this bill draft. And then finally, page 4, line 4 just specifies that the business council promulgates rules for implementing that section.
So Brian, I think since this is an all new section, just a note, I mean, as we talked with providers, one thing that was obvious was that there was a shortage of middle mile. The way the structure of the broadband grant program to begin with really was talking about more last mile. And so we felt it was better to just put a whole new section in to deal with that. And even the challenge process, it looked better to do, you know, what you see in here, it was just fairly simple. We wanted to just kind of put everything in one place. So are there any questions of Brian or the work group on this piece of it? Not, Brian, I guess continue. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, now we'll move on to amendments to the existing statutes. And the first one is page 4, lines 22 and 23. And this is the speed requirements for projects under this article. And this amends that for business speeds from 1 gigabit per second download to 900 megabits per second download. And that's just to account, as I believe has been previously discussed in other bill drafts, to fit the current speeds of certain cable that may be, I guess, near gigabit, but not necessarily exactly 1 gigabit or more. Mr. Chairman, then the staff comment on page 5, the working group highlighted the need to have a discussion about speeds and whether those speed requirements should be otherwise amended or changed. The provision in that staff comment is just another place in 912-1501 where speeds are being discussed. So that's just for the task force's consideration. And
just a note there, Brian, to the committee. You know, we talked about speeds, in the task force and decided in the end to leave things alone other than to make sure we made it kind of cable compliant, so to speak. And what you'll see eventually in the bill is a deletion of a whole bunch of speeds that in our opinion was duplicative. And what's in 912-1501B really governs. And to have it in there twice, and in fact, it was a little confusing because it was in there twice and not in the same exact manner. So then you'll eventually see a strikeout, and it's because this exists in B. So please go ahead, Brian. Are there any questions of this section? Okay, please continue.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, now we're moving on to page 6, and this is 912-1501C. This is the subsection that specifies who eligible applicants are to receive funding. The staff comment is just paragraph I, is just for reference. It's not being amended. So eligible applicants, except as provided in subsection D, are public-private partnerships. which include, and then paragraph 1 is a business entity that has experience or is authorized or has experience installing broadband infrastructure and is authorized to conduct business in the state. And then paragraph 2, the changes on page 6 and subparagraphs A and B are just conforming changes. And then the new language on the top of page 7 is inserting a state agency as defined by 92-1202A1. And that is just basically an executive branch agency is the definition in that statutory reference. The staff comment on page 7 just notes that 912-1501D is below, and that subsection allows a local or tribal governmental entity to apply by itself without a public-private partnership if it puts out an RFP and no broadband provider responds to participate in that project. The changes on page 7, lines 24 and 25, and again on 27, make clear that a state agency cannot independently or by itself apply for a broadband project under this article. So unless there are any questions, I'll move on to page 8. This is subsection G, and this strikes the definition of business corridor. This strikes language regarding the need for a business corridor to be such that providing broadband services at the specified speeds is technologically and economically feasible. So it would just basically make the definition of business corridor an area where multiple businesses are located or are under construction or undertaken process to be located next to each other. Page 8, line 11 are definitions that are being added to apply to the article, and it's definitions of last mile and then middle mile. And these definitions are based on a previous bill draft, 20 LSO 737, that the task force looked at back in June. So those are the two definitions from that bill draft that are being brought here for inclusion in this article.
Brian, just quickly, Barbara, those definitions, while we're here, they look good to you?
Yes.
All right, thanks. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to page 9, line 9. This amendment is just a conforming amendment regarding the middle mile projects. And it just states that funding through a public-private entity shall not require the business entity to set different rates or terms. And this just accounts for the potential arbitration that may take place in case there's a dispute. So that's that conforming amendment on line 9. Page 9, line 14, this is an amendment to the application process, and it just specifies that the business council can require or request an applicant to submit additional information to basically let the council properly assess an application. And then it can also request a business entity to modify an application based on current access or availability in an existing in the area that's proposed by the applicant's project. Moving on to page 10, this is 912-1504A, and this is the challenge process. So on line 5, we're adding language that says within 3 business days of the close of a particular funding application process, the business council must not only publish on its website the proposed geographic area and the proposed speeds, but it must also now notify each broadband provider listed with the business council as providing broadband service in that proposed area.
And yeah, just to quickly, Brian, on that, just to let the committee know. So in current statute, it was kind of reversed. It was upon the applicant had to do all of this. And we thought, well, no, if we're going to have a notice, let's just make it part of the notice right up front by the business council. And then it doesn't require the applicant to go through all of this. It becomes the responsibility of the business council, which they're kind of doing anyway, I believe. And so that was the idea, was to just kind of streamline that. And then obviously you'll see down in the next amendment was to just tighten that up, time frame up. So go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I did email, and I'll discuss, I don't know if you want to discuss this now or probably at the end of the draft, since it came from, I believe, you and Ms. Serga, an amendment to part of this language. But that should be in your inboxes for review. As you noted, Mr. Chairman, on line 9, page 10, an existing broadband provider right now has 30 days to challenge an application. That is being changed to 10 business days after publication of the information on the website. Moving on to page 10, line 16. Right now, one of the things that a challenger must show is that it has started construction or has undertaken permitting or other significant steps toward construction for a project in that area at the proposed speeds. This would strike the reference to other significant steps toward construction and state that the provider has begun or has received other federal or state funding for a project in the proposed area. Moving on
I guess,
to
Brian, just to explain, the thought process that, at least that I had behind this is, or other significant steps. I thought it was too broad and left too much open to, what does that even mean? Somebody's gonna have to write rules on it, and maybe they have written rules on it, but it just seemed, and the whole I thought was this federal or state funding piece. So that was kind of what we agreed to. Thank you. Please continue.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, on page 11, this is an amendment to 912-1504C. And this is if the council denies funding to an applicant as a result of a challenge. So if the challenge is successful, but then the challenger does not complete the project as required in the time frame, the challenging provider, this is the new language on line 5, the challenging provider cannot apply for funding for a project under the article for the next 5 years. And then on line 10, it changes that prohibition on initiating another challenge from 2 years for the next 5 years.
And committee, once again, we wanted to put a little more teeth into if you say that you're providing or going to provide and then you don't provide, just a little more teeth in the statute to encourage you to not to mean it. If you're not going to do what you said you were going to do, there needs to be consequences if a project was there and available. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next on page 12, line 6. So this adds a new paragraph to the list of factors or considerations that the Business Council must take into account when determining funding under this project. And it just adds a paragraph that says that it would be for projects that are economically and technologically feasible for expanding broadband access in unserved areas. And this is in part based on that stricken language back in the definition of business corridor.
Right, and just a note on that, we felt, that they should be doing projects that are economically and technically feasible. And so we just made that part of the priority list instead of where it was before.
And then, Mr. Chairman, next are 3 provisions that are being repealed. So first, 912-1503, A9 and 10, those 2 paragraphs currently require, as part of the application, the broadband provider to show that within 6 weeks of applying, they have reached out to the other broadband providers in their area and contacted them in writing to let them know of this proposed project. And then if it receives any written responses from another provider, it must include those as part of the application. And then second, 912-1506A, this is a subsection that states that before funding is provided, there must be an agreement that 10% of the project cost comes from the governmental entity that's participating in the public-private partnership, and no more than 50% of the total project can be funded. That language is being repealed. And then finally, 912-1508, this section requires the Business Council to promulgate rules for minimum speeds that funded projects must meet. And then there are certain speed requirements that were in that section that were required to basically come online beginning January 1st, 2022. With this section being repealed, that language that's back in 912-1501 that's being amended here and that's included in the staff comment, that would be the controlling language for speed requirements for projects going forward.
Thanks. Thank you, Brian. And just to talk a little bit on these repealers. So if we go back to the first repealer, that's that whole discussion I mentioned that we had about should it be the applicant or the business council? So we just said, business council, you contact as part of notification. I think that cleans that up. The match, we decided, hey, we want to get stuff out there. So we're not going to really require a match. We want to get this money out and on the ground. So we just eliminated the matches. Now, certainly there's a wide range in between what was there and what we did. And so if the body of the committee, the task force feels like we need to do something differently, we can do whatever. And then obviously that other one was, just like we said, we had it in two speeds in two places, and we decided just one should govern, and they weren't written exactly the same either. So Brian, I guess we're about there, huh?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, I'll just wrap up with a couple housekeeping things on pages 14 and 15. It just specifies that this act applies to funding approved on or after the effective date. It includes a rulemaking section and then a split effective date. The rulemaking section becomes effective immediately. The remaining provisions come into effect July 1st, 2021.
Thank you, Brian. And so are there any questions of Brian before I take public comment? I don't see any. So Brian, I think we've got some public comment on this bill, and let's see who's popping in first. I think I got Liz Zerga on my notes first. So Liz, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the task force. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the chairman and the working group for allowing me to chime in as this bill was developed by the working group. A number of our issues were addressed. I think that this bill in its current state represents a good improvement over the existing statute. We have learned some things over the course of the last couple of years, and certainly the Connect Wyoming process helped give carriers a level of comfort regarding making some changes to some of the statute to streamline things. That said, just a couple of comments with respect to the bill besides general support. And, I think I better stop and say Liz Zerga, representing the Wyoming Telecommunications Association. I apologize. Sometimes these things blur together and you forget that you haven't introduced yourself again. So page 10 of the bill, line 9, this is where this is the challenge process, and as Mr. Fuller explained and Mr. Chairman explained, this process is now streamlined under this bill. The applicant no longer puts out in advance for 6 weeks notice to underlying carriers, and instead it's now all in front of the Wyoming Business Council. And the idea under this piece is that the Wyoming Business Council will notify to the public by posting on its website that there is an application. And it will also notify those carriers that it has of record as being in the underlying area that there is a project. And the original statute had a 30-day challenge process. And I think there is recognition from some that is too long. And so there was discussion about shortening that, and what the working committee landed on was 10 business days. I've taken that back to my providers, and some of them are okay with that. And others say, you know, we're really small shops. We've got one person that monitors these things. If they're on vacation and they come back, you know, and if they're gone for a week and they come back and this has posted, happened to be the Friday that they left, and these things tend to post on Fridays, you know, that's a really short time frame. And so they were looking for just a little bit more, even 2 more business days. So that something like that. So I thought I would relay that comment back to you. Some of my clients are fine with it, but I did have a couple that chimed in on that. And then the other question that I have, and this is something that I raised with the chairman, and I think Mr. Fuller did an amendment to address it, and that is one of the things that we learned in the Connect projects, the Wyoming Connect projects, was there was quite a bit of confusion when a project, we were notified that a project was occurring. The notification was that it was in a certain county. So let's just pick Fremont County as an example. It would say that it's in Fremont County. Well, I have a number of providers who have facilities in Fremont County, and we couldn't ascertain whether or not the project was overlapping any of their facilities. And so when I looked at this bill, and I spoke with the chairman about this, I said one of the things that would be so useful and streamline challenging in this is if we required the applicant, when they applied, to include a shapefile depicting the location and boundary of the proposed project area, or for a middle mile project, a map depicting the location and endpoints. And then the business council posts that. So there isn't any question about where this project is going to be located. All of the other providers that are sitting out there can say, oh, it's Fremont County, you know, it's Highway 287, it's 12 miles south of Lander, and it's, you know, this area. I don't have any facilities there. No sense worrying about that. No need to challenge. So that was my suggestion, and hopefully you have that amendment in front of you. And so that's something that my providers would really like to see go into this bill. It provides a lot of clarity and avoids unnecessary challenges or confusion. And then the final comment I have, and this is a question directed to you. It's page 14, and it's section 6, and this has to do with the effective date of this legislation. Not something we talked about, and the way I read this, especially B, is that sections 5 and 6 are effective immediately. And 5, of course, is the rulemaking for the business council, and 6 is the section that we're talking about. And I'm wondering, just thinking this through, we have changed the application process in this bill. There's a change on timelines. I'm wondering if it wouldn't be cleaner to just have the whole bill effective immediately. You know, I know that there are rules in place at the business council with respect to the underlying program that may conflict with this, but the statute would supersede those. I'm just concerned about confusion about what process we're using or as we go forward. That's something to think about. I'm not advocating necessarily a change, but I looked at it and I thought about practically how would this work, given that there are deadline changes, speed changes, middle mile in here, state in here, not in here, and given the fact that the construction season, as we know in Wyoming, is fairly short, I would much prefer to see this bill just go into effect. You know, once the legislature acts and everybody's operating under the revised bill, so we all know what we're doing. Those are my comments. And again, I'm very appreciative of the work that has been done on this. I think it's a good bill. I'll stand for questions.
Ms. Zerga, thank you. And I guess my first question is back on page 10 on your comments. And certainly I understand where somebody's gone to vacation, but the whole company shouldn't have gone to vacation. And it says it shall notify each broadband provider who is listed with the council, as opposed to just posting. You know, if it was posting, that would be different, but it also requires notification of each provider. And to me, notification means you get a hold of somebody.
Mr. Chairman, the way the Business Council has it right now is they have a contact person at the provider. That's who they have. That is their contact person. And what I've said is, I have a couple companies who are very small and they have a contact provider listed. It's usually the regulatory person. You know most of them. You've talked to most of them. If that person happens to be on vacation when one of these posts, they may not see it until they get back. And so that was the only feedback I got on that with respect to just a couple of very small companies.
Thank you. You know, and I think as much what I said to you as much as anything is telling the Business Council that when you say notify isn't send an email. You know, notify is you get a hold of somebody. And so as much as anything, what I'm trying to tell them right now is notify people.
Okay, understood.
We get too used to this electronic stuff and we forget that there's people that are there or not there at the end of the line. I sure appreciate your comments. And does anybody have any questions of Liz? Senator Landon, please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'll try not to wander too far off the highway here, but Liz, I really appreciate having had the chance to work with you on this interim. I've learned a great deal, but I keep going back in my mind to the fact that we are relying very heavily on the Wyoming Business Council. If you look, for example, at the language on page 9, and I'll tell you what shook me up a little bit. Last week, I spent quite a bit of time with a constituent who had a wrangle with our state lands agency. And I came away from that a couple of 3 hours just being very disappointed in how rules and regulations were simply kind of ignored and wandered away from. And so can you help allay my fears here? I mean, I'm sure I've got a lot of faith in our council, but I wonder, are we okay with provisions like the one at the bottom of page 9 that say, well, we can just get these guys to modify this one, even though there's a competitive bid over here or someone else is doing something. If we can just get these guys to do this, then it takes the other one out of play. Is there any danger on that front? I hope that makes sense.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon. The purpose of that language is because in the when we were going through the Connect program with the governor's office, they came to a place where they had an applicant who made an application for a project that overextended into another applicant's area. Most of the application was an unserved area, but let's say there's a strip that is well served by an underlying carrier. When they found that out after communicating with the carriers, what they did was they went back to the applicant and they said, you've overextended into an area. If you modify this boundary, and it is geographic boundary, to pull it back, we will award this project to you. But if you don't, we're not. It's an overlap. And so that kind of flexibility in a program at the governor's office was something that we thought was really useful. It is not in the state grant program. And so the purpose of that language on lines 14 through 19 was to enable the council in that kind of a situation to say to the applicant, we would grant this, however, you're overlapping and you're hitting a served area, and we're not going to fund you for that. So what we're telling you is modify this application, pull the geographic area back so you don't do that. It's up to the applicant then whether they do that or not. If they say, no, it's my application, that's the way I want it, then the Broadband Council says we're not accepting that. we're just not going to fund it. But we're telling you, pull it back. And if they do, then they fund it. So I think that change is a good change. It is designed to address exactly that issue. And I think the Broadband Council and the Business Council are well suited to be able to handle that kind of a thing.
Thank you for that, Liz. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any other questions of Ms. Zerga? If not, Liz, thank you for your testimony and thanks for the help during the process.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
With that, Brian, on my list, I have next Jason Hendricks. Is he on or not on?
Mr. Chairman, I heard from him. He is not planning on commenting on this topic.
Very, very good. So the next one on my list is Jody Levin.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Jody Levin on behalf of Charter. I would like to echo some of the appreciation that Ms. Zerga has already extended. Charter appreciates being able to participate in this process, talk about a number of the areas where we feel statute can be improved. So there are several changes in here that we believe will help streamline the process and hopefully actually get some money out on the ground. There are a few areas where Charter would like to see some additional amendments. One of those is on page 4, where we're talking about the type of infrastructure that must be installed when you receive funds. We greatly appreciate the change in the definition to accommodate Charter's gig level service. The question that has arisen, however, is that the current service offering is 940 over 35. And the language in this section talks about 900 over 100. So the infrastructure can be scaled to reach those speeds, but it's not the current service offering because that's not what customers are currently asking for. So there was a concern that if Charter was to receive funds and they place infrastructure, would they even be eligible for this section because their service offering isn't 900 over 100? So one small change they would request is on line 22, after residential areas and insert scalable to. So the infrastructure could be scaled to that 900, 100, but it wouldn't require them to offer that immediately. I think the next issue that they did flag for me is they kind of tie together. So the challenge process is incredibly. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So, and I'm sure somebody got that down, maybe Brian did, but could you go back and tell me again where you put in available to?
And Mr. Chairman, it is page 4. It is line 22, and it is after residential areas and then you would insert scalable to.
Okay, and I guess, let me ask a question. So scalable to is, I hate nebulous stuff, right? So scalable seems to me to be a nebulous sort of a thing. So what if you just had, instead of 100, you had 35? You know, if you went on page 5 and you just amended that rather than get into what is scalable, not scalable, then have to have somebody determine that. So can you give me your thoughts on that before you move to your next comment?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, that your suggestion would accomplish the same goal. I think the concern is that they're putting in infrastructure that is certainly capable of higher speeds. But if you read this section, it also talks about the service offering. So the service offering isn't 900 over 100, it's 940 over 35. So the scalable 2 notion is that you could push that infrastructure, whether it's electronics or a software upgrade, you could push it to a higher speed, but you're not doing that currently. So I think, you know, either option will accomplish the end goal. It's just a concern that the way this reads, they believe they would be ineligible for funding currently.
Thanks, Jody. Please continue.
So, Mr. Chairman, as I was beginning to discuss, the challenge process is extremely important. And I think we saw this with the Connect Wyoming funding as well. So the notion that you're going to be able to give the council the authority to modify applications, Charter thinks that is a wise and prudent change to statute. But we need that application, we need the challenge process to accommodate enough time to really determine whether or not the providers believe the applicant is causing any overbill. So I spent some time with Charter asking them how this operates in other states that have these broadband enhancement programs. They said in the areas where they offer service, there isn't any state that is less than a 30-day challenge process, but it's combined with an entire different kind of application process. So most states issue a deadline by which applications must be submitted. So say January 15th, applications must be submitted to the council. So that backs up the entire time of when you would be working, providers and eligible entities would be working on a potential project. Then you submit it by January 15th, you allow a challenge process until February 15th, and then you do a funding determination by March 15th, so that we coincide with the extremely challenging and limited construction period in Wyoming. I think one of the things that we also learned under the Connect Wyoming effort was that unless contracts got out in a timely manner, you did have some applicants, Charter included, that was awarded funds, but because of negotiations back and forth between Charter and the AG's office, Charter ultimately got to the point of saying, we don't have confidence that we can still build this and have it constructed by 12/30 in order to meet the CARES deadline. So I think it was a good lesson learned. I don't think, you know, by any means, I'm not doing any finger pointing here. I think, you know, the AG has a process, legal departments have a process, and that just takes some time to kind of work that out. But if you know by March 15th that your project is a go, that gives you adequate time to get equipment ordered and get ready for the construction season when we get past that kind of frost thaw period, so that you can kind of hit the ground running. So the concepts tie together, I think, nicely in other states. We don't have that kind of specificity in Wyoming. The statute says that you shall fund no less than biannually. I think the process would be benefited by harder deadlines. When must you submit? When can you challenge? And when can you notify? Then that 30-day challenge process isn't as probably concerning, because it's going to tie into when a funding determination also gets made. So those, and I don't have necessarily specific language to offer on that today. It took me a while to kind of work through this with Charter to figure out in the areas where they believe, sorry about that siren going by the office, in states where these programs work the best, that's the process that gets followed. And perhaps this could be a rulemaking, or if this is something that the committee is interested in, I'm glad to work on amendments and have those ready if you have another meeting, or certainly for session. But that seems to be kind of how things work more efficiently in other states.
So Ms. Levin, on that note, I do think, biennially. So I think that is rulemaking, and maybe that what you just said, and I think this would be another note to self. I would tell Ryan and Rob Krieger that in rulemaking that probably could be looked at. I don't know if you need to have hard deadlines in statute, but if the committee feels we need to, we can look at that. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly understand, and I had this conversation with Charter as well, that then I know Wyoming typically does not like to put those kind of hard deadlines in statute and leave those for rulemaking. I think even if you were to put a hard deadline of when either an application must be received and it has to be early in the year, or when funding determinations are made, you can essentially accomplish the same goal. What could happen, and I'm very sensitive to this, is you could have an application come in July. And by the time you go through a challenge process, you may well miss the construction season. So again, the process is benefited by backing up those dates and having them occur earlier in the year, so you don't have a process issue that causes you to miss the construction season. So, Mr. Chairman, if the committee doesn't kind of want to go that route, we would ask on page 10 for current law to be retained on the 30-day period for challenges. It can be extremely difficult to actually figure out whether or not there's any overbuilding that occurs. I do agree with Ms. Zerga that the more information that's in that application helps that process. Having a shape file of where the project is located will help that process. Right now, it's pretty nebulous, and so it's really difficult to figure out whether or not you're being overbuilt or not. Mr. Chairman, on page 11 under funding determinations, as I discussed with the subcommittee conversation, Charter has quite a few concerns with middle mile projects, mainly because of their experience in other states that it doesn't always lead to end users being benefited. They've got some examples in a couple of states where substantial funds were spent on middle mile and it was, a road to nowhere, so to speak. I think the language that got put in here, it's very tight, it's very narrow. It certainly gives Charter much more comfort than they see in other states. They would like the committee to consider, though, that the highest funding priority for projects should be those that are last mile end user. So you can retain the middle mile projects, but as you go to the council goes through and looks at what projects to fund, those that benefit last mile end users would be given almost like a super priority. So you could accomplish that on page 11 in subsection B, beginning on line 20. You could add into there that the highest priority be given to applications to provide last mile broadband internet service. Again, I think that there are these priorities outlined in statute. This just makes it explicitly clear where you want your dollars to go as the highest priority. And Mr. Chairman, those are my comments. Charter is in support of the repealers, as we discussed. So that's the removal of the 6 weeks notification that has to happen before an application is filed, and the removal of the matching funds.
Thank you, Ms. Levin. Are there any questions? Ms. Sessions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Levin, I just wanted to make sure that I was clear on your comments on page 4 regarding speed. So the way I understood it, and I just want to make sure I'm hearing correctly, is Charter technically capable of delivering the 100 meg up, or are they not? Just from a clarification perspective, because we're combining end user packages, I think, with technical capabilities.
Mr. Chairman?
Please
Ms.
go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Sessions. They are technically capable of offering it. They're just not offering it today. So what it would require is that it would require some sort of software or electronic upgrade. The underlying infrastructure itself can support it. They're just not offering it. And so the concern in that section became on line 20, where it says supports broadband service at a minimum. So that's just not their current service offering. And it's, you could probably say it's a splitting of the hairs, but there is this concern that, well, if we're not offering that service, are we even eligible to apply?
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Not, Ms. Levin, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And the next one on my list is Troy Babbitt.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Troy Babbitt, CTO of WIDOT. We do not have any comments on Working Draft 200.
All right, thank you, Troy. Are there any questions? I guess, Mr. Babbitt, the question I'd have with you is, this does open it up for a state agency to apply. And as we've talked in the past, perhaps a state agency is, would be a WIDOT that might apply to get some middle mile in place. So that's kind of the idea, is to give agencies the ability to identify a project if there's some. Would this fit with what you guys could do?
Mr. Chairman, I think there's certainly opportunity. Of course, I think of the WiLink network. We would not be interested in, of course, competing against the telecoms if there was not service, but something for the long haul that might be picked up for emergency communications or for public safety might be of an interest. But we would certainly work with service providers first to utilize those funds for possibility.
And Mr. Babbitt, what I think this would also open it up is, as you and the business council look through this, if there are projects available, you guys could actually be the ones that apply. It still requires a public partnership, and so you'd have to RFP it and get somebody to do the work. But I guess my point back to you all is, you're the get her done team, right? So I think I hope you think about that as we move forward.
We will. Thank you, sir.
Are there any questions of Mr. Babbitt? Not, we'll move on. Brian, I see Mr. Glass's thing up. I do not see him on this particular, but if he has a comment on this, he's certainly welcome. Mr. Glass, do you have a comment on this?
Chairman Summers, can you hear me?
I can, Mr. Glass. Please go ahead.
Yes. Okay. Well, I'm going to be out climbing a radio tower this morning to modify our equipment to conform to changes in federal regulations, which took us off a frequency and gave the spectrum to the cellular companies. But I wanted to stop by and talk about a couple of things in the bills that are being discussed today. I've read through them very quickly because I only could see them this morning. They weren't on the website over the weekend for me to digest, but. In any case, first, I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Brett Glass. I founded the world's first wireless ISP, which is called Lariat, 28 years ago here in Albany County, and we have been serving the county ever since. And we've never accepted a government subsidy. We've never really wanted to. When we've applied for them, it's been half-heartedly because competitors might otherwise get the subsidy, and never actually accepted any. We really believe that market forces should dictate the deployment of broadband, and are very concerned about this bill because it makes changes to a subsidy program that's already fundamentally failing. It's sort of like sending it's throwing money at a problem without really understanding the problem. With these amendments, the statute would have the same basic problems that the original one, and I think it would get worse. because it's trying to micromanage our industry in a way that's completely uncharacteristic of our state's usual policy, which is not to micromanage and to respect the market process. Among other things, it's requiring deployment where there's no demand. It rules out funding upgrades where they're being asked for, where there's existing service, but someone does need something faster. And it tries to tell broadband users what they want or need. There wasn't a survey done to determine what people actually need. No technical expertise was applied to this. Our company, which has the most experience in the state about this, was never consulted. Instead, and we can see as this process goes on that it's being tailored to favor a particular large out-of-state company and their offerings, which is exactly the opposite of what we want, especially for homegrown services like us. It's being tailored to our out-of-state competitors and away from what we provide. It has some things in it which seem good on the surface, but have not worked in other places. It has a provision having to do with sharing of infrastructure that's being funded. Experience has shown that when you fund an infrastructure project, even with public money, no provider will willingly or fairly share infrastructure with a competitor. I'm particularly concerned in the case of Charter, which absolutely refuses to work with us on anything. And apparently this is a company policy. I would love to see shared middle mile infrastructure, but this bill goes about it in ways that have failed, and it really needs to be looked over. The other thing we're concerned about is administration of a project, of a program like this.
Mr. Glass?
Yes?
Just as a rule in our committees, we try not to run down any business, any person. You can run down us as government all you want, but we try to be a little more civil than that to the public.
Chairman Summers, I'm sorry, I was citing it as an example, but there are others too. But I'm sorry about that. In any case, we also are concerned about the fact that the Wyoming Business Council would still be managing this program. When we applied, one of our few applications ever for public money was for the CARES Act funds, and they denied it based on a complete misunderstanding of federal policy. And we weren't given an opportunity to chime in and say, "Hey, you're misreading the map, and you don't understand the policies that were used when the federal maps were compiled." Instead, again, it funded larger out-of-state providers and actually gave them an advantage in the areas where we're trying to do projects. They've also put competitors of our company on their advisory council. Yes.
Mr. Glass.
Yes.
On this bill that we're talking about now, what are your comments on this bill? The CARES Act funding, we already went through that. So,
yes,
please stick to this bill and what your concerns are with this bill. Okay,
well, Mr. Chairman, I'll just sum up then. If this bill is passed, we'll probably mostly assume a defensive stance against it and fight to try to prevent it from subsidizing overbuilds. But it imposes enough requirements, enough very micromanaging sort of requirements that we probably would not apply for the funds ourselves. We really believe that this is going the wrong way, and I would love to see this bill rewritten so that instead government is facilitating deployment by private parties and then getting out of the way, rather than throwing money at things in a way that won't help. And that's really all I have to say.
Mr. Glass, I appreciate your comments. Does anybody have a question for Mr. Glass? If not, thank you, and get on those towers while the wind's down and don't get blowed off. So thank you, Mr. Glass. Mr. Fuller, are you up? I think that's the last public comment that I thought I saw. Just a note, when did the bills hit the website? Because I thought it was earlier than what was represented.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, those were posted last Monday, the 12th. There was an update this morning, and that was just the amendment to the bill regarding the shapefile that was emailed to the members this morning.
All right, thank you. So committee, I think we're at that moment where we can work this bill if anybody in the committee wants to move the bill.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move the bill.
Second. Moved and seconded, moved by Landon, seconded by Doc Stutter. And I guess how I'll do this, is there any general comments, or just go through the bill page by page? Senator Dockstader, please. Senator, for some reason, you're still muted. You show no mute, but you're still muted. Now you're muted again. Can't hear you.
I'll pass then.
There, no, now we can. You're up.
Oh, okay.
You're good.
Well, we got Barbara on the line. We kind of touched on those speeds earlier on, and I just want to make sure before we move all this through that we just move those speeds over from previous legislation. Barbara, is that pretty accurate to what we need? That would be on page 5.
So I guess maybe for clarification purposes, these would move across under the to the statute as well, or would it move to the line 21 and 22 on page 4?
So, Ms. Sessions, all of the stuff that's under the staff comment piece, that's in existing statute. It's just shown here to let us know what those speeds are if we wanted to change anything from current statute. So it's not anything going away. It would remain the same unless we chose to amend it.
Okay. No, I think it's fine. I did have a comment on that section that we may want to insert some language around the minimum as defined by the FCC if we're going to leave the 25.3 as the minimum, just so that we don't have to keep readdressing this bill as the FCC changes the minimum.
And Ms. Sessions, we can certainly have that debate when we get to that page if you want to make an amendment. Yeah. Typically, great. You know, I mean, corporations is the master at this. They sometimes cite federal regulation and insurance code and all this stuff. And by and large part, the legislature is very reticent to cite something we don't know what it is. In other words, you know, we like to know what they're going to do, and then if we want to change it, we do it. Corporations, if we get to that point, I guess either Senator Landon or Chairman Landon or Chairman Lindholm, talk to us a little bit about how corporation handles that challenge that we have. Senator Landon.
Well, Mr. Chairman, that's a great question. I think you hit the big nail on the head. We always try to be very careful with things that could escalate without our say-so. You know, when you tie to a federal statute like that, I think that's the concern, Barbara, is that, you know, we're just going to get escalation that we may not even want to join on board with. So that's just a general comment to start with, and maybe the co-chairman has a little bit more from corporations from our angle.
Chairman Lindholm.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. We should be reticent at times to cite, but for lack of a better option, we really don't have a choice unless we, you know, want to take the current language as it stands and then paste it right in. It's probably the best option. We've done that a couple of times too.
All right, thanks, and thank you, Ms. Sessions. So if there's no other general comments, I'll just go through this bill page by page and we'll see where we get. Are there any changes, modifications, revisions on page 1? Page 2? Page 3? Page 4? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, just to give us an opportunity for a little bit more debate with regard to a recommendation made by Ms. Levin, I would propose on line 22, the scalable to language that was suggested, just to throw it out there as a motion.
Is there a second on that motion?
Second on that.
It's been moved and seconded. I guess Senator Landon's, I certainly agree that we need to address it. And I'm not hardcore either way, whether we change that speed from 100 to 35 on page 5, or whether we do the language that was suggested. And Barbara, or Ms. Sessions, this is where I'm going to kind of lean on you. And I know that puts you maybe in but that you're our expertise on this in this committee. So I would ask you what you think is most prudent.
Well, I had a little bit of an issue with it only because I felt like we were really leaning too heavily towards one company to base the speed requirements. And I understand we need to include the cable companies as well. But I would guess I would just say what's best for the state of Wyoming versus any one carrier. The scalable to language, it makes it pretty gray, in my opinion.
And Senator Landon, that'd be my issue as well. I'd like to just put the 35 in if we have a problem somewhere later where it's identified. Scalable too, I have the same concern. Any other comments on this motion to amend?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Von Flattern, please.
I'm trying to figure out what you mentioned 35. Where'd that come from?
Senator, when Ms. Levin was testifying, she said their product that they put out is a 940/35 product. So we have the 900. So if we go and on page 5 and delete 100 and put in 35, it will fit their product without using kind of gray language like scalable.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with that. I only second the motion just to have a discussion about this, but the scalable seems like somebody could leave it at minimum and leave it there forever. And so that wouldn't achieve what we're trying to do here.
Senator Landon, is there any, would you mind making a new motion perhaps? Senator Landon.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm willing to withdraw that motion if the second is okay with that. And that would allow us to move on to conversation at the top of page 5.
Senator Landon, thank you. And why don't you just go ahead and do that? We'll move to top of page 5. Senator
Chairman,
Landon?
I believe at the top of page 5, if the motion would be to replace 100 megabits with 35. I believe that would be the appropriate motion.
Is there a second on that? Senator Von Flattern, I see shaking his head for a second.
Second.
Is there any more discussion on this amendment? If not, all those in favor, put your hand and kind of out there in front of your face, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't see Lauren voting. So that motion, 6, that motion passes. All those against, just, I guess I ought to do that, but I don't think there's a need. There was enough in. So now we continue on page 5. And so Ms. Sessions, was there something in this area that you had concern about?
No, you clarified the FCC comment, so I'm good, thank you.
All right, sounds good. Anything further on page 5? Move on to page 6. Page 6. Ms. Sessions, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just actually a question for clarification. Do special improvement districts fall under anything in this language or anyone in this language?
The corporation chairs are the expert, but I believe that they would be a governmental entity. Isn't that Chairman Lindholm? I'll call on you to answer this one.
Yeah, that's correct, Mr. Chairman. They'd be considered a political subdivision, so a governmental entity.
Brian, are you good with that? Brian Fuller?
Mr. Chairman, I guess my one question with that, if you look on page 6, line 24, we don't use the term political subdivision. I mean, we specifically spell out city, town, county, or joint powers board. I would read that language to include only those entities as being eligible applicants.
So Ms. Sessions, if you think that needs broadened, it would require an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to amend this language to include special improvement districts or political subdivisions. Whichever
Is there
language.
a second on that amendment? I'll second it for debate so we can have that discussion. So Ms. Sessions, please, as you speak to this, just as somebody that would have a question, so think of the pros and cons, why you want to do this, and would it have a broader impact that we might not like? So please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm thinking about it in the terms of some of those entities that we've received communications from in the Teton County area. One of the things that they could do is to form a special improvement district and then apply for themselves for this grant with the telecommunications provider.
So my question is, if we did special improvement district, would we really want to do, all political subdivisions? And so this is a question I have back to the chairs of corporations or Brian. By opening that up, political subdivisions, what are we doing? As opposed to narrowly defining it. Brian, maybe I'll go with you first.
Mr. Chairman, I think if you use the term political subdivision, it would open it up, I think, to just about any governmental agency that we have in the state.
So, Chairman Landon, please.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think Brian hit the nail on the head again. My wheels are turning trying to think of examples, everything from irrigation districts to there are so many political subdivisions out there. The co-chairman would be able to expound on that a lot better than me, because 2 or 3 years ago, that you might remember, the Corporations Committee dealt with a lot of subdivision law, and we tried to get some arms around it. You're talking about 50, 60, 70 different kinds of subdivisions out across the land. And just this morning, I'm trying to think of some examples and not doing very well at it. But I think there's got to be some caution in there somewhere. Maybe the co-chairman has some other thoughts.
Chairman Lindholm, you got any thoughts, or perhaps even a motion to amend if we don't like that piece of it?
Mr. Chairman, I'm pretty new to amendments, so I'm going to keep my mouth shut on that. But I tend to agree with Senator Landon, or Chairman Landon. So,
Ms. Sessions, do you have any thoughts after hearing this discussion on your motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the clarification. I do agree then that we should remove political subdivisions, and perhaps my motion would then be just to include special improvement district.
And your second is good with that, because I was the second. So any questions on or further comments on this amendment? If not, all those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, I think we're unanimous on that one. Great. All right. Thank you, Ms. Sessions, for working with us on that. I think now we're on, let's see, let's just start. Anything else on page 6? Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. Page 9. Ms. Sessions, please go ahead, page 9.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to propose an amendment on statute or section 912-1503, that would require applicants to submit a shapefile of the project, including perimeters.
Okay. You know, Brian, I'm going to bring you back aboard. And you'd sent out that amendment, right? And I don't know if it was, and so I guess Ms. Sessions, I'll second your amendment, but I want to make sure. So this is what we were sent out, and this is the first part of that amendment. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded.
And Mr. Chairman, maybe just as a matter of course, since the language on page 10, line 8 would also go with that, the task force may just wish to consider moving and adopting that proposed amendment in total.
Ms. Sessions, would you be good with that?
Yes, thank you.
Your second would be good with that as well. Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, you know, my only question for Ms. Sessions would simply be with regard to our providers. We've tightened things up, you know, pretty dramatically with this piece of legislation. Are we okay with our providers being able to accomplish all that we're prescribing here in the bill? It sounds like you're okay with that, but I just maybe a little bit of assurance that this isn't going to add undue burden that's going to prohibit, you know, good proposals.
Ms. Sessions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Landon. I can't speak for all providers, but I can tell you that at least in my experience, the ones that I have worked with would be able to provide shape files, and this would not be an undue burden.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments or questions or on this amendment? If not, all those in favor of the amendment, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it passes. So now we're on page 10, I believe, unless there's anything else on 9. We're on page 10. Are there any other amendments on page 10? If not, I'm gonna move on to page 11. Are there any amendments on page 11? Any amendments on page 12? Any amendments on page 13? These are the repealers that we repealed. Any amendments on page 14? And I have in my notes here on section 6, and I would like to bring Brian back in. And it was suggested maybe that, you know, if we just made this effective immediate, could you kind of go over what your thoughts are, what that does? Give me your thoughts.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. This construction is one that has been used in the past to basically, I guess for lack of a better term, give the agency a head start in rulemaking. When a bill becomes effective, though, is certainly within the task force purview to decide, you know, really when the substantive provisions in this bill draft become effective.
I guess committee, I would think effective immediate is fine. If we figure out a problem in the interim, that'd be great. But I'm looking for a motion. If there's none, we'll just leave it as it is. I think we're going to leave it as it is. So that's end of 5, then on to 15, nothing really there. So that's the bill. Everybody, are there any comments, general comments, questions on the bill before we vote? Senator Landon.
Just a real quick comment, Mr. Chairman. I do want to send a tip of the hat out to Mr. Glass and speak only for myself, but I do get sensitive when I hear comments that we might be fencing anyone out or creating government bureaucracy that might be a hindrance in some way. But I like the work that we've done throughout the interim on this. I think it gives us an opportunity to to stimulate some development. But I'm gonna continue to think about that and watch carefully and just listen carefully as we go forward. I get a little heartburn when I think that maybe we're setting up a process that's going to cut people out of the opportunities out there, so maybe we should just be watching that, listening. I think it's a good bill for now, though. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that, Chairman Landon. And I want to say on this bill, everything we did pretty much in this bill was to make it more open, to open it up more to more people, to make the challenge process less burdensome, but still provide a challenge process that providers are somewhat comfortable with. In the end, it's, can we get more broadband out there? Can we use the money we set aside to? There's certainly enough need. If we found, hopefully we've walked that line and we'll create something that's workable. So, any other comments on this bill? If not, all those in favor of the bill, raise your hand.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if, given that the task force can't sponsor legislation, but in past, for past task force, there generally has been a roll call vote to kind of move a bill out of the force. But it's your call, Mr. Chairman.
Right. I got too many. I clicked and then I was in bad shape. So yeah, we can do a roll call. It's not going to be a committee bill. I don't know that it matters, but we can do a roll call vote on it.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, this would be for the task force to approve 21 LSO 200 as amended. Senator Dockstetter.
Aye.
Senator Landon.
Aye.
Senator Von Flater.
Aye.
Speaker Harshman.
Aye.
Representative Lindholm.
No.
Ms. Hardesty. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Aye, sorry. Broadband is a little slow.
Ms. Shainfeld.
Aye.
Ms. Sessions.
Aye.
Chairman Summers.
Aye.
Motion carries, Mr. Chairman.
And in the end, I'll just kind of work with Senator Dockstetter, and we'll figure out what bills pass this committee. We'll figure out which committee we will shop them to. Some of the likely committees would be Management Council, which many of us serve on, and the other one would be corporations. So that's kind of probably my two go-to options. Will be those two committees. And so with that, we will move on. I think it's 10:09, so let's take a 10-minute break and come back at 10:19, and we'll continue forward. Thank you. All right, let's see if we get everybody back on camera. Ms. Hardesty, have you been able to kind of clear up your voice so we can hear you? You sounded like you were in a bowl or something.
I think so. Where I'm at, am I off? Can you not hear me?
That time was much better. So maybe you were speaking too loudly before. I don't know what it was, but it was really difficult to hear, and we certainly want to hear you. So thank you. With that, I'll reconvene the meeting, and I guess just for a little background on these next bills. They were all in one bill, I believe. Where's Brian at? Let me get Brian back on the line. So these were all in one bill, and we kind of split them out into different topics. Some topics we took, some topics we didn't from a big bill. And in the end, we could recombine them and make it one bill if we pass any of these forward, which might simplify it so the committee's not looking at multiple bills. Unless there's one bill somebody really likes and bills we don't like, that are, we don't want one idea to drag down others that we do like. So with that, Brian, I guess the next bill for our consideration would be 21 LSO 0195 version 0.2, telecommunications and broadband providers rights of way. And with that, Brian, I'll turn it over to you to go through.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this draft is basically the rights of way provisions that came from 21 LSO 19. It includes the changes that were discussed in the task force meeting last month, along with a couple of other changes at the behest of Representative Summers. So starting on page 2, this will amend, so the previous version of 21 LSO 19 created a new section that applied specifically to broadband providers. What this draft does is goes into the existing section for basically communications companies for their right-of-way provisions, and makes those changes into this section and adds broadband providers to the definition of a communications company. So on page 2, lines 11 and 12, instead of requiring that company to obtain the consent of a city, it just files an application with the city. And then similarly for state highways or county roads, instead of obtaining permission, it files an application with the State Transportation Commission or the Board of County Commissioners. Page 2, line 19, this is the language that states that upon receiving an application for funding, any permits or licenses or authorizations must be issued by the State Transportation Commission, the City Council, or the Board of County Commissioners not later than 15 calendar days after receiving the application. And then page 3, Mr. Chairman, lines 5 and 9, this inserts references to broadband internet in the definition of communications company that exists for that section. Page 3, line 13 adds the definition of broadband provider, which would include a telecommunications company and a cable operator. That language on page 3, line 15 needs to be stricken as it's a redundant reference that goes back to subsection B. And then page 3, line 18, this is the language that states that nothing in this section for rights of ways authorize a corporation to install or set permanent towers along any of the public roads or streets. Moving on to page 4, this language is basically the speed and latency requirements that were found in the other bills. So any project constructed using a right-of-way must have at least 50/10 speed and then a latency not greater than 100 milliseconds at least 80% of the time.
Brian, just to, why I'm here, and I'm going to ask a question, and then maybe others will have a question right here. But, the section D is an artifact from the previous bill. And the previous bill, if my recollection, was very broad in that it basically gave right of way down county roads and public roads. And so in this, on line 4, it says, or providing internet service shall ensure that broadband service is available to all persons adjacent to the right of way. And I didn't notice this before, but that was, would you say that was an artifact from what we were trying to do earlier, which was if we did a right of way thing that we were granting something? I guess my question is, do you recall where this came from? And is it now applicable maybe in this bill?
Mr. Chairman, if I recall, I believe that discussion was to basically make sure that any infrastructure was not basically met a certain speed and latency requirement. And the key change was, I believe from, I'm not sure if this was from June or September, is actually the made available. So as long as they're making available that service at that speed that's available to those customers along that right of way, that was my understanding, is kind of the give and take, if you will, of basically getting automatic permits for rights of way for the broadband provider. Whether now, in terms of whether the task force wants to retain those requirements in this bill, that I think that's a question for the task force.
Correct. And in a way, I don't even know whether, because we've changed this bill. We changed the original bill would have granted rights of way. In other words, we would have given a right of way across private land. We took that out. This just says governmental entities, you need to provide your permitting, but we're not messing in the private right of way issue.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. So this section, yeah, we're not bringing in the question of eminent domain in this bill.
And if this goes forward, committee, this bill, I'm going to look at Chairman Lindholm eventually to think this over in his mind, whether we even need D at all, and Ms. Sessions as well. Think about that as we move forward. So Brian, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to the bottom of page 4, section 2. This is the language that would require the Department of Transportation to petition or file an application with the federal government, with the applicable agencies, to seek a broad form or blanket easement along for rights of ways along public roads that run through federal lands. Section 3 on page 5 spells out how that would proceed. I would note on page 5, line 8, the date for doing that. And basically I extrapolated that from the previous version, given how much time they would have had in the previous bill to do this, and just set that at May 1st. Of course, that's certainly that deadline for when WIDOT must do that is up to the task force to decide. And then the rest of the language just requires them to send a copy of the bill and the petition to the congressional delegation and work with a working group of stakeholders, federal representatives, industry representatives in completing this petition. And then, Mr. Chairman, the bill on page 6 would be effective immediately.
Okay, Brian, and I do have a question. So I want to clearly understand what this bill does. So this bill would say if you're a broadband company, or however you want to put it, and you file an application, then that permit shall be granted within 15 days. What if a town says, I've got a major construction project going on that street, and we can't permit that until blah blah blah. I'm wondering. I know what we're trying to do here. We want to get things going and done in a timely manner. I just want to understand the unintended consequences, and so I throw this out there. What would happen in the scenario I just suggested?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I could surmise maybe one of two things would happen. First, is not to issue any permit or authorization, which, seems to be, that would conflict with the language. The language is quite clear that they have 15 calendar days to issue that. Mr. Chairman, the other potential option could be, issue the permit within 2 weeks, but say, construction shall commence on X after that project, for example, is completed. So I'm not sure if that answers your question exactly, but it could be.
Thanks, Brian. Senator Von Flateren, please.
Well, after I read the language, I didn't see any reason that they could not issue the permit. So I think that language needs to be upon receiving, and page 2, line 19, upon receiving application as required in this subsection. And if everything is all correct, any necessary permits, license, or authorization shall be issued by the city council. It just seems to me that there is no reason that they cannot issue the permits according to this language.
Yeah, and I think they can. The question is, I assume they could issue, like Mr. Fuller said, that they could issue a permit that said construction could be, we didn't say when they would allow construction to begin. So I just think as we move forward, after we need to consider this language and what we may want to do. Chairman Lindholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would even take this, I guess, in my opinion, I'm a little bit different than most folks, but I would even take this one step further. For instance, when it comes down to comprehensive plans and planning documents, those types of things, when that application is submitted, a planning commission has 45 days to approve or deny or do something with it. If they don't do it within those 45 days, then it's deemed to be approved. If they say nothing, it's deemed to be approved. And so I would almost think some language like that in here, if nothing's done within 15 days, run the ball. I don't know where everybody else is on, but it kind of leaves it. I get Senator Von Flateren's question that they essentially have to approve with this language. I guess I read it a little bit different, but we should be cognizant of the fact that there might be some jurisdictions that just flat ignore an application. And I think we would need some language to address that possibly.
Okay. Just any questions of Brian on the bill? Ms. Schoenfeld.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I have been in conversation with Jeremiah from the WCCA regarding this bill, and there are concerns from the WCCA as a whole, and myself also as a county commissioner, in that this potentially is a rubber stamp, and maybe if 15 days is, if it's business days, that's one thing. If there's holidays involved, that's another thing. I think that we should look at moving forward with this bill and potentially working with some of those outside entities, municipalities association, to amend it to fit their needs as well. We don't want to skip over the county commissioner's authority, nor the city council's or city's authorities.
And just a comment on that, I think in a way that was the intent, was to step over their authority because we wanted to get projects on the ground sooner rather than later. But it does raise the question of, if you have something going on in your town or your county that that right away can't be plowed into right now, we have to, I think, consider that if we move this bill forward. So, Brian, I'm going to pop Brian back up. Are there any other comments or questions of Brian? But I do want to pop Brian back. Brian, we have public comment at the end of these, but I don't know how I'm going to keep track of all of the comments. I'd rather work a bill, get public comment. And so I see that we have kind of the same group of people available for this bill, for these sets of bills. And so I'm going to just see if it's all right with you. Will that work if I do public comment on this bill?
Mr. Chairman, we can proceed however you wish.
Chairman Lindholm,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I ask a question of Mr. Fuller really quick?
please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fuller, I don't know if you heard my comments in regards to the bottom of page 2 in regards to the application. Say a county or city or the Department of Transportation didn't take any action after an application was received, just flat ignored it. Do we need to put in some type of language saying then at that point it's approved if no action's taken? Or how, or is that essentially how it's drafted now?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lindholm, the way it's drafted right now, the answer to your question is silent. I don't see where it's covered. I mean, the only thing that is covered in here is a directive to those particular entities to issue the permits. What happens if they don't is, I don't see it addressed in this subsection.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I think I'm going to go to public comment on 21 LSO 0195. And I have Mr. Glass up first. Mr. Glass, if you're not there, I'll skip to you to the bottom. And I'll go with Liz Zerga first.
Mr. Chairman,
I can hear you. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
I've tried to start.
There you go.
There I go. Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the task force, Liz Zerga, representing the Wyoming Telecommunications Association. With respect to this bill, 21 LSO 0195, working draft number 0.2, our review of this bill indicates to us that sections 2 and sections 3 are good as is. Section 1 needs work, and I'll talk about some of the concerns about that. Let me start with what the current law in 126.813 allows us to do currently. So right now, if this bill didn't get enacted, the way we deal with municipalities, counties in the state is a little different for each. So for municipalities, the first thing we have to do is get a franchise if we don't already have one. And when I say we, I mean broadband providers, telecom providers, any of those kinds of things. We're already covered under this bill, under the existing or under the current statute with the existing language. So we go into a municipality and we get a franchise. Franchises, as most of you know, require a city ordinance. Those require multiple readings. And so the way the statute reads currently is we get permission, and that permission is a franchise. It goes to the city council. And then after we get a franchise, which clearly will take way more than 15 days, it will probably take 90 days to get a franchise at a minimum, unless we opt into an existing franchise of another carrier. Then we file a permit, usually with planning and zoning or county road and bridge or city road and bridge. And those are the places sometimes there's a little bit of delay. This bill treats this quote permission as a one size fits all for cities, which is, you can't tell if we're talking about franchises or permits. I think your intent might have been permits. I don't think you want to get involved in changing franchises. That's a whole can of worms. But the way this statute read was consent. Consent is a franchise from a city. With counties, most counties, we don't have franchises. There are some franchises in a few counties. Most of them are permitting. And for most of the permitting, we don't go before the Board of County Commissioners. We go before County Road and Bridge. They have established processes, and we go before County Road and Bridge. This bill would change to require us to go before the county commissioners. And so that could actually be a delay from current process. And then with the state, we apply with the highway department, and they have a process that's well established. And we don't have any complaints about the amount of time it takes for the state highway department themselves to issue permits. So this bill treats all three as a one size fits all for cities, counties, and state. And I don't think that's something that you should do. I think it is, with respect to cities especially, it confuses the process as to whether we're talking about franchises or permits. And for counties, it could actually end up extending the amount of time. So that's the first part of this bill. On page 3, that part of the bill, I know the intent is to get broadband internet service and broadband internet provider into this authority, but it's already there. It's there under existing statute, and maybe part of the confusion is the language in the existing statute, which talks about a communications company, but I assure you, I helped draft that language. It was done to allow broadband and to allow cable and to allow telecommunications. So it's already there. And so this ends up being kind of duplicative. The language is duplicative of what's in the statute and is not necessary. And then with respect to page 4, subsection D, this is a part, I think, Mr. Chairman, you're correct. When we were talking about condemnation for right-of-way over private, this was the piece. If you put this piece in for state, county, city right-of-ways, you're actually putting us in a place where you are making it so difficult to install broadband. So for example, a lot of my carriers install fiber broadband capabilities to cell towers. And so we're running along a county road with a piece of broadband for a cell tower. And if you add that we have to serve every person along that way, you probably made that project not feasible for that cell tower, which is, I don't think, where you want to go. I understood it with respect to private when we were going about private land, but over city, county, and state, we actually see this as a penalizing of the broadband carriers and something that would make the system not very workable. So those are my comments with respect to the bill. We really do appreciate the sentiment of trying to speed up actually permitting, not franchises, but permitting, especially at city and county level. But I just think that section needs work. And that's where I would leave that. And I'm happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
So Ms. Zerga, I think all really good comments, you know, and stuff I see in there as well. So my question is, you know, if we wanted to proceed with a bill that did put a little bit, you know, put their feet to the fire, and that includes YDOT's feet to the fire, because I've heard the same concerns kind of surface about YDOT at various times. Though it's mostly about federal stuff. It's really not about the state, but I have heard it about the state as well. So if we were to do something to improve getting, or to get those cities and towns and counties to get the work done and get it out in a timely manner, what would we do?
Mr. Chairman, I think what you would do is, first of all, you'd make clear that in this statute, you're not talking about franchises. That's city franchises. That's a whole different ballgame. So what you're talking about is construction or right-of-way permit that is not a city franchise. So that's number one. Make clear we're not talking about franchises. And number two, I think that you would need to change your language about where you make application to. You know, it would be application to the governing body or their designee, because in most instances, they've delegated or designated their road and bridge or their zoning and planning or some other sub-government entity to deal with this on a routine basis. You don't want to force the carriers or the Board of County Commissioners to have to do this if they aren't now. That just lengthens the process. So it's them or their designee, and then look at what a reasonable period of time is for them to issue the construction permit, the right-of-way permit, and be specific as to cities, counties, and if you want state. Again, we have not had problems with YDOT. We've had problems with the feds in YDOT right-of-way. And so I want to be, I am not here to chastise in any way YDOT. YDOT has been good to work with. And so have most of the counties, and so have most of the cities, but occasionally we run into problems with getting permits from them.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions of Ms. Zerga? Not, I appreciate your comments as always. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And with that, I'll go back to Mr. Glass. I think I saw a chat thing that said he was up and running.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you, Brett Glass, Laureate. I think that this bill, in contrast to some of the others, is a very positive thing. It's removing obstacles and it's paving the way without providing unfair subsidies to one entity or another. So I definitely support this. One thing that you should be aware of, though, is that right now, the city council, actually the planning commission here in Laramie, Wyoming, is considering a very, very restrictive bill having to do with the use of rights of way for broadband that would directly conflict with this. They've hired a consultant to do this who also drafted a similar one for WHAM. They throw all sorts of roadblocks into the way, supposedly for the purpose of aesthetics and safety, but I think really, one can argue the motivation is more to try to maintain control of it and to get money for it. But in any case, I think we need to be attentive to that and definitely talk with WHAM about this and talk with the city governments about what they're doing. To the extent that this would supersede some of the requirements that the city of Laramie is proposing, I'm definitely in favor of it because some of the requirements that they're proposing are unreasonable. But we should have a conversation. Nobody should be blindsided by this.
Mr. Glass, thank you. Are there any questions of Mr. Glass? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Glass, I appreciate you being here again on this one. You mentioned a bill that might be forthcoming. And do you have any idea? It certainly hasn't come through our committee on corporations or from that direction. Do you expect someone to sponsor the bill individually, or do you know exactly where we can expect that bill to arrive?
Mr. Glass.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Senator Landon, this is not a bill that would come to the legislature. This is a city ordinance that would become part of the city's Uniform Development Code. If you'd like, I can forward you the latest draft that I have, which is still right now before the City Planning Commission, but it is going to be coming before the City Council. So you can get an idea of what cities are imposing and how they might conflict with this. I actually would hope that a statute like this could supersede them and prevent them from imposing the kind of obstacles that I see inherent in the proposed ordinance.
Mr. Chairman, I thank Mr. Glass for that clarification. You could tell that I was a little confused, Mr. Glass, so thank you. Appreciate that.
Any other questions of Mr. Glass? If not, Mr. Glass, thank you again for your comments, and we might see you on the next bill. Now I'll go to Ms. Levin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Jody Levin on behalf of Charter. I will agree with the comments that Ms. Zerga has already articulated and not repeat those concerns. Charter shares the concerns that she has outlined. I think it's important to distinguish between the franchise process and the permitting process. Corporations has actually worked on the franchising process over the last few years. Chairman Lindholm has championed that effort, and we have made some good progress in that regard. Charter's predominant concerns are also on page 4, subsection D and Romanet 1. as Ms. Zerga had indicated, this language about ensuring that everyone along the right-of-way will have service could actually stall a project. And so there are some concerns about that. In addition, Romanet 1, where it talks about fixed speeds of 50-10, this does not distinguish between residential or business. It's just a flat 50-10. And in some areas, it may be technically or economically not feasible to get to those higher speeds. So it may be a situation where you could get to 25.3, but you may not be able to get to 50-10. So we look at that language on page 4 as potentially being problematic for the deployment of service. So we'd like those sections to be removed.
Ms. Levin, thank you for your comments. And are there any questions of Ms. Levin? Not? Thank you again for your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I think the next testifier is Mr. Babbitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question. I see Director Reiner's on the phone. Would it be appropriate, could I ask if he would like me to go first or the director to have his comments first?
You know, let's let the director have his comments first. We'll go by the chain of command, right? We'll start with the general and go down the line. Mr. Director, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hey, just from comments from the director standpoint from YDOT, certainly YDOT's in the business of making this a success, and we focus on being timely and providing the appropriate permits. And I thank Mr. Babbitt for his work on that, and I appreciate the comments from Ms. Zerga. In terms of this bill. From the YDOT perspective, we do have a couple concerns really on page 2, line 19 through 23, and just conceptually probably 2 issues with that, and they've both been covered already. One is it is very possible to get a very incomplete application, and it just can't be processed. And so our initial recommendation would be something like, upon receiving a complete application that meets established standards, then we take the appropriate actions. And so that is key. 1 is we get a complete application. 2 is it is possible that we should not permit the application. Now, I don't know when the last time we didn't, but this strikes me very much as a rubber stamp, and I'm not sure for the state of Wyoming that's what we want, because there are responsibilities that YDOT does have pertaining to highway safety that may say, hey, listen, this one's not going to work. And so I think there's got to be a way for us to work through that in the language. We will always permit it if we can. But I think we owe ourselves a way to say, hey, this thing's not going to work. We're going to have to do something else. And so those really are the comments. Mr. Chairman, there's on page 4 and on are some requirements. We're tracking those, and if this passes, then certainly we'd take action on those. Again. I just realistically, as we've discussed this potential of federal highway, they understand what we're asking, and so far have not been favorable. I just share that with you. So, Mr. Chairman, that would be a quick brief from me. Any questions, and then we can certainly pass it to Mr. Babbitt.
I was muted. Director Reiner, thank you. I will turn it over to Mr. Babbitt if he has any additional comments, and then we'll get some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just be very brief to follow up just on a couple things. On page 2, line 7, where it does mention the communications, their fixtures and facilities, I do think it follows up and it answers in the next couple of lines there as line 9, as to not inconvenience the public in their use. And I think we would recommend, say, in their use or safety per se. We certainly have a huge, strong emphasis trying to make sure that our right-of-ways are safe for any fixture that goes into those. And then page 3, line 2, as the director said, right before application, possibly say something complete and vetted, because we do find ourselves in situations of returning incomplete applications in those kind of scenarios. And that is the only comments I have, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Babbitt. So I guess my general question, Mr. Babbitt, is, and maybe you can get this for us, is in general, how long, what's your average get out the door time for one of these applications? And so what I also worry about what you just said, I agree, you need to have a complete application, but I've seen government make applications so stinking difficult that it's almost impossible to get the application done, or it's very onerous. So one, what's the hang up in your application process? What do you, is there why are you worried about complete applications? So in the past, you've had poor applications. So I got 2 questions. What's the length of time out the door? Can you give me that information for most of these permits? How many days? And then 2, what are you seeing on application process that concerns you specifically? And is it a function of your application process or a function of companies not being able to follow that?
So Mr. Chairman, on your first question, how long does it actually take? I have talked with our utilities department. I don't believe that's something I have a 100% accurate track record on to give you that information. As director said, we try our best to get those turned around and out the door as quickly as possible. From our perspective, I think that all starts with the communication of understanding where the project is and where do you want to go and what are our challenges, so that the negotiations from the get-go, there's an understanding as to, is there even room in the right of way, or some of our challenges of slope or any of those type of things. So unfortunately, I don't think I can give you the numbers answer on the time of an application. Second of all, I would think one of the reasons that we probably have some challenges is probably because we have to follow those federal guidelines wherever we cross the federal lands, and make sure we follow all the process of SHPO and NEPA and all those rules. And that unfortunately sometimes is out of our hands as far as getting an application moving as quickly as possible. As the director said, I think we've gotten down the process very good, as Ms. Urga suggested. I think most of the telecoms come to us and we have those conversations way before we're even trying to get an application approved. We already have an understanding and we've already had those conversations. So hopefully I've answered your question. It just seems to be a complex question. It's not black and white.
So I guess my question back to you, if your application you had concerns about the language on application. So give me some examples of why you're worried about that specific piece, complete application. So what have you seen that, have there been lots of instances where there's not a complete application? And I guess I'm asking you in very general terms, is your application process onerous?
Mr. Chairman, I think we've refined our application process to move as quickly as we possibly can. In a scenario that I could give you, if we're looking at a 200-mile stretch of property, we work with our district engineers for anything that may come. I mean, if there's a river it's got to cross, a bridge structure, do we bore above or underneath? Or there's so many things in the planning section of that just to rubber stamp an application, I think we could knock out before we ever get to that point in time. And again, I have to come back to the federal piece of it. That from my perspective, that's probably my understanding is that's our biggest delay, as where it does cross some of those situations where we've got to follow the federal guidelines and process.
Fair enough. And
Mr.
so like
Chairman?
on a permit, so when you issue a permit, all rights of way or, I'm not going to get the legal term right. So obviously your highways go across both public and private entities. And so when a broadband company comes in and let's say we're going through a piece of private property, they'll have to seek a right of way from those private entities to run their broadband within your right of way. Is that true or not true?
My understanding is that is true. That we work with the property owners for the right of way or the easements as to what is necessary to get that legally worked out.
So does the broadband provider do that work or do you do that work? And then on the federal land, same thing. So I would assume that the broadband provider, and maybe Ms. Sessions will bounce in here, but I would assume the broadband provider is the one that's having to get the right of way, legal access across that federal land as well. So that's not your deal. That's not part of your permitting. You have to have that in order to maybe to grant a permit, just like you would to go across private. So is that correct?
That is my understanding, Chairman.
Ms. Sessions, is that correct? So I guess, Mr. Babbitt, my point is to getting your permit out, you don't have to worry about the federal land piece. That's the provider having to try to get that. So that's not a part of your, other than that needs to be in the application or part of the permit. It's not something that you have to do. So if you were required in X number of days to kick out a permit, as long as you had a complete permit, right, complete application that included those rights of way, then that would be feasible, whatever that day period, how many days that may take, whatever we put in there. Is that true?
Mr. Chairman, I agree with that statement, yes.
Okay. Are there any questions of the general or Mr. Babbitt from the committee? If not, I will move on. Brian, do I have anybody else in the queue?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think so.
Perfect. All right, I'll close public comment.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, I do notice that Mr. Glass has raised his hand.
Mr. Glass already had his, well, I'll give him one more. Mr. Glass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was only one more thing that I wanted to comment on in this particular bill. There's a section here which says nothing in this section shall authorize corporations to set or install permanent towers along, across, or under any of the public roads, streets, and waters of the state. The two things about it. First of all, it still says corporations. I mentioned this in my earlier comments, and well, not all telecommunications providers are corporations. I'm a broadband provider and I'm a sole proprietorship. But the other thing is, it says towers, and one of the things that we could make use of the right of way for that would be very useful is to put up even a small pole, no more than 30 feet high, with radio equipment on it so that we can backhaul from the right of way out to areas which need high-speed broadband. So I'm wondering if it's possible to either clarify or qualify this so that we would be able to do that. Otherwise, the right of way wouldn't do us much good, because when we wanted to leave the right of way, maybe come off a run of fiber, we wouldn't have any way to do that gracefully.
Thank you, Mr. Glass. I think what this says is this act is not forcing that. I don't think it would preclude either a city or a county or the state of Wyoming from granting you that if it fit within their current authorizations or rules or regs or whatever. But this would just not grant that. But I certainly understand your comment. Any other questions of Mr. Glass? If not, I'm going to close public comment now. And so, committee, what's your pleasure on this bill?
Move the bill.
I'll second for discussion. So, Chairman Lindholm, please tell me a little bit about this bill and the challenges in the bill and whether you have solutions to clean up those challenges.
Mr. Chairman, I think I've got some solutions. I'm definitely going to be looking towards Ms. Schoenfeld and Ms. Sessions in regards to other suggestions, but I think I've got some that fixes some of the issues. The first one, if you'd accept amendments right now, Mr. Chairman.
So are you going to, so Chairman Lindholm,
Yep.
Are you going to do conceptual amendments, or are you kind of doing line by line? Because if you're doing line by line, I'll just go page by page. If you have some large conceptual amendments, I'd probably start with that. Otherwise, I'll just go page by page.
No conceptual for me, Mr. Chairman.
Any general comments on this bill or questions of Mr. Fuller, if we have anything left before I go page by page?
I guess, Mr. Chairman, if I could.
You bet, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to explain why I think this could be one of the more important pieces of legislation that the legislature could take up. And it has to do with the fact that as we have taken in prior testimony, one of the largest issues in regards to broadband expansion is developing the right of way, is getting an area where you can actually put the fiber or put up a tower or anything like that. That is in large part a huge issue. And so this would, the way I view this, if we adopt some of these amendments, it would really clean up that opportunity and make it easier to be able to get that right away, which means it's easier to get broadband out there. Everybody's a win. So I really do think there's a lot of merit in this legislation.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to go page by page. Are there any changes on page 1? Any changes on page 2? Chairman Lindholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, what I would suggest doing is, and this would be part of page 3 also, but it's down on line 19 on that portion upon receiving an application. What I would like to do, and I would like to provide, I know I said it's not conceptual, but I would like to provide a little wiggle room for LSO to make it fit just right. But my amendment, Mr. Chairman, would go at the end of that section. So after lines 1 and 2 on page 3, where it would state, if no action is taken by the governing body or designee within the 15 days, within the 15 days allotted for the application is deemed approved.
I'll second it so you can discuss it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the reason I'd like to do that is, as discussed with Mr. Fuller, there is no, the current legislation, the current bill does not take into consideration what happens if somebody just does nothing with the application. And so I think there needs to be that mechanism. And I kind of pulled this language from Title 18 in regards to subdivisions. So it's already kind of standardized. It's already been used in other portions of statute. If this is approved, I do have a fix for the 15 calendar day issue that I believe Ms. Schoenfeld would probably appreciate.
So Chairman Lindholm, I have a question. One of the questions was, we didn't want to get into the franchise versus permits, and that would be a separate amendment, but it would still be in this section, right?
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
So this is really, did you contemplate anything about complete application that was YDOT's concern that they wanted kind of a qualifier in there that an application be a complete application?
Mr. Chairman, I did not, because I do believe by stating complete application, they could throw a wrench into whatever they want. I don't believe that the Department of Transportation would do that under their current administration, but I don't like leaving those doors open. And by putting in a complete application, I think it's covered under on line 19 where it says upon receiving an application as required. I think that covers that concern. I'm of the opinion.
Okay, are there any comments or questions on this amendment?
You want me to read it one more time, Mr. Chairman, just for clarification?
Please restate it.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, so it would state, if no action is taken by the governing body or designee within the 15 days allotted for the application, the application is deemed to be approved. And then, Mr. Chairman, I would also, you'll note that I said days in there. And so I have an amendment to handle the 15 calendar days stated as another amendment after this.
All right, if there's no comments or questions, Ms. Schoenfeld?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think that this amendment, it solidifies the concerns that the Wyoming County Commissioners Association has about the rubber stamping of any applications. So.
Okay, Chairman Lindholm.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Schoenfeld's absolutely right, and I intend it to be that way, that this will be a rubber stamp if no action is taken. But we do that for platted subdivisions. We do that on multiple different aspects where we do have that knife hanging that if the governing body does not act, then it will be approved. And so this does force governing bodies to take action. Now, granted, that's very rarely used, but it has happened in the past in multiple different types of projects and approvals and those types of things where a governing body just won't do anything because it happens to be their least favorite type of individual. And so they just by not doing anything, they don't get, there's nothing that can be really done by the applicant in that regard. And so I guess this is ensuring, I guess, that that action has to be taken, whether it's approved or not. That action has to be taken.
So I have a question now, whether it's approved or not. So, Mr. Fuller, can I bring you back in? So, Mr. Fuller, they don't have the option. Do these entities have the option to deny?
Mr. Chairman, I mean, I think the way it's written right now, they would not. And I suppose that, the question would be is, the language that's being added on page 2, line 19, how that would interact with the current processes that have been undertaken to secure a right of way.
Chairman Lindholm, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, Mr. Chairman, I think I can tie that into my next amendment to fix that situation. And
Representative Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, if it's the idea of, the completed application and a preliminary type decision granted within 15 days and a final decision within 30 or something. But I think what we're all thinking about is that, you can't stall it out. And I think, the entities are concerned about rubber stamping that they have to approve it. So I think that needs to be cleaned up somehow.
So Mr. Fuller, can I bring you back into the room? Thank you. Probably better stay here a while. Is that an amendment to the amendment, or is that a friendly amendment to Chairman Lindholm? Are we trying to find something we can work with here, Chairman Lindholm?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, the amendment does not take into consideration the amount of days. I think that would be a separate amendment, and an amendment I would support, but the amendment that I have proposed does not take into consideration the length of time. It just takes into consideration that you can't just do nothing with it.
Okay, repeat your amendment again then.
Mr. Chairman, it says if no action is taken by the governing body or designee within the 15 days, so we could just say days, I suppose that would be, and then come back and fix the 30 days later. Anyways, allotted for the application is deemed to be approved. So if we struck out the 15, that way we could fix if somebody wanted to make an amendment to make it 30 days or something like that, but still it leaves that knife hanging in place, which I like that, keeping a knife in place.
So Representative Harshman, do you have an amendment to the amendment? Do you want to try to clean this up or not?
I think, Mr. Chairman, I think we can just wait and pass this and then, or if we want to pass it, and if it passes, then we can keep working it some more.
All right, so we have an amendment on the floor. Any more comments to the amendment on the floor? Chairman Lindholm.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If my second agrees, I would strike the I'd strike the number 15 from my amendment.
I agree. Okay, it's sensing an urge to vote. All those in favor of this amendment, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that amendment passes for now. And so we're still on this section. I'm going to give Representative Harshman an opportunity if he wants to do some cleanup, or is he waiting to do that? Because
Mr. Chairman, if you could just kind of read it how you think it says, what it says now, or maybe Brian can.
Brian?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think with that amendment, here's how the bill would proceed. You file an application, you receive the application, the entity receives the application, currently has 15 days to approve it. If it does not, it's deemed approved. So that's as currently drafted, how the rundown of that subsection.
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
If I could, then I'd like to amend that work just that that a preliminary decision will be granted within 15 days and a final decision within 30 days.
I'll second that. For debate, please, Chairman Lindholm.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question on that would be, would that would just be 15 days and 30 days, getting rid of the calendar portion, correct? Because that was a concern that was brought up. As it's currently written right now, it says calendar days, but as was brought up, there might be a holiday or something like that in there.
Representative Harshman.
Mr. Chairman.
Calendar or regular?
I think generally, don't we, it's working days or would probably be the proper way to put that in there and clean it up. Brian knows that. I think that would probably be the cleanest way to do that.
So,
Brian?
Mr. Chairman, Speaker Harshman, then I take it your intent then is 15 business days and 30 business days. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Chairman Lindholm.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If that is the case, then I think we just say days, because of the way I understand existing statute, the way this currently works on multiple different other aspects is just by stating days, the intent is working days, or at least the political subdivision can define it unto themselves.
So Chairman Lindholm, it is right now, I think the motion is business day. I think it makes it cleaner. It just lays it out there, calendar days, business days. You may be right, but it's clean this way. Any other comments on this amendment? Representative Harshman, then I'll go to Chairman Lindholm.
I think I need a second. I don't know if I've gotten a second.
I seconded it.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman Lindholm.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Considering our, and I appreciate the amendment, I do think that 30 days is too long, considering how long our construction season is in regards to broadband development. It might very possibly come down where we've got the same type of situation in the future, where we've got all of a sudden a pile of money is dumped on the state and we've got to build broadband like wildmen. And so for that reason, I will be opposed to the amendment because I do think that 30 days eats too much of a construction season if a situation like this CARES Act funding is brought forward again.
Any other comments on this amendment? All those in favor of the amendment, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That amendment passes.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Harshman.
Mr. Chairman, I think what Representative Lindholm said, it's a good point. I just propose that we change those 15 working days to 10 and 20 working days instead of 15 and 30.
So that's a new amendment. And there's a second on that from Chairman Lindholm. Any debate?
Question.
All those in favor signify by raising your hand. Motion passes. All right, Chairman Lindholm, tell me you're going to clean up the permit versus that whole, oh, help me out here, the franchise fee.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, permit versus franchise fee. And I'm trying to, Mr. Chairman, I didn't write that down as well as I should have in regards to which portion of the bills Ms. Zerga was specifically speaking to.
So, Brian, what I'm going to do is go to you. And so what could we do to make it clear that this is about permits and not franchise fees?
Mr. Chairman, this is, this is one option that just came to mind, in light of the comments. It appears that in practice, the interpretation of these statutes has been obtaining consent in a city means a franchise. And if that's the case, then one possibility is to reinsert the stricken language on lines 11 and 12 to require that consent is obtained. And then on page 2, line 19, some reference to upon receiving consent, then the time frame for the permit issuance kicks in. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if that is the intent of the task force. I mean, that's a very different approach from what is taken in this bill.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think what we can do here is a conceptual amendment, and I'm not going to make the motion on it, but I mean, I think Mr. Fuller can get it done if we have a conceptual amendment. I do think if we don't want to completely eliminate the franchise thing, or we just need to be outright and say that. So, Chairman Lindholm.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know why, or at least I think it would be appropriate to state right on page 3, line 3. So this would be right after that section on page 2. I don't know if this would be a little I or what have you, but we could just say that anything in this section shall only apply to the permitting process of right-of-way and not to franchise fees or something like that. Maybe that would be my conceptual motion to put it in somewhere that this does not apply to franchise fees.
So, Mr. Fuller, I'll second it so we can discuss it. But Mr. Fuller, what's your thoughts? Is that something like that would work or not?
Mr. Chairman, it would. The other option, I guess going back, we could say in any city shall first obtain a franchise with the city council. And then upon receiving an application or a franchise, I think either approach would work. I think it's a matter of placement and whether you want to piggyback off of existing language or not.
Chairman Lindholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like that idea, except that some cities don't have franchise fees. So that would force cities then to have franchise fee agreements in place to be able to take advantage of this. And it would just, so I think we better stay away from that. Otherwise, my little town of Sundance is going to start hitting people with franchise fees, and we don't want to encourage that.
Okay, so Chairman Lindholm, read your amendment again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This would be conceptual on page 3, line 3, inserting a little I or something along those lines, that nothing in this section shall be construed to affect franchise fees and shall only apply to right-of-way applications or something like it. It would be conceptual where Mr. Fuller can make me sound smart, though.
Ms. Sessions, are you more or less comfortable with that? Understand it? Is there ramifications, implications on you all? I hate to put you on the spot, but just try to get your feel for this. And Ms. Sessions, for some reason, I can't hear you, even though it says you're.
Sorry, I have 2 mute buttons. Thank you. I have just some general concerns about the bill as it relates to the conversation at hand. I think I'm comfortable with where we're headed, and we'll save the rest of my comments, I guess, for later.
Okay, very good. There's no further comments on this amendment? All those in favor, raise your hand. Motion passes. Okay, we are on page 3. Chairman Lindholm, I have in my notes that it was that little b, that our changes were duplicative. I'm going to bring Brian back in. I believe it was Miss Zerga said that built into the definitions was already this. So Brian, where are we kind of at on this definition thing? You figured that out?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I thought there were concerns in the previous draft about what a communications company meant that were raised. And so that was the reason for including broadband specifically in that subsection. Now that said, the way it reads right now, communications company is really any person or business that provides telecommunications services, internet protocol enabled service, or voice over internet protocol. And then that is defined in, Mr. Chairman, in that statute to mean any service, capability, functionality, or application under existing internet protocol that enables an end user to send or receive a communication in existing internet protocol format. So, Mr. Chairman, I mean, that to me, without being technically savvy, that seems fairly broad. I think it would be a question for the task force if that definition needs clarified or not. If it does not, then presumably this section and part of the bill could just be deleted.
Ms. Sessions, I'm going to kind of go to you. I think this has always been Ms. Levin's, kind of the cable people's concerns about getting the proper definition in there, but it seems like what exists is already broad enough. Do you think we can eliminate our additions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do. I agree with Ms. Zerga.
Would you make that motion by chance?
I would make the motion to strike section B.
Yeah, so I'll second that. And so that would be just to take it back to the original language, move it out of the bill.
Correct. Thank you.
All right. All those in favor? Oh, Chairman Lindholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just wanted to show support for the amendment because it returns it back to the original legislation that I passed a couple of years ago. And go Team Lindholm.
Team Lindholm. Okay. All those in favor of that amendment, raise your hand. Motion passes. Is there anything further on page 3? Chairman Lindholm, your hand's going up and down, so I'm not sure. Okay, thank you. Page 4. Chairman Lindholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we just handle it all and just wipe that out, all of D.
I'll seconded by Ms. Sessions. I don't think any comments needed. Commented by anybody. I think that we agree that was an artifact from a time from the previous bill and really is not necessary now. So all those in favor, raise your hand for that amendment. Striking of D. Motion passes. Any further amendments on 4? Now we go into section 2, which is really us trying to convince our good federal partners to be nice and understand the value of internet and to the good people. So any changes on 4, 5, or 6? Chairman Lindholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've got these different dates in here. On page 6, under section 4, the act is effective immediately. But under section 3, we say the Department of Transportation shall seek approval from the governor to proceed under section 2 of this act not later than May 1st, 2021. I think we just do that effective immediately also. Either that or just remove that portion of the legislation so the whole thing is effective immediately and they can run the ball immediately.
You make your call on what amendment. Oh, Brian, please go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Lindholm, that date has nothing to do with the effectiveness of that section. That's the deadline by which YDOT must do that, must basically apply to the federal government. So, of course, that date, what deadline the task force or legislature wants to set is up to you. But that's the purpose of that date in there.
Chairman Lindholm.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Fuller, for the explanation. That's kind of what I was thinking it was too. My motion would be, because ultimately, Mr. Chairman, while I certainly hope we hear back from the federal government, I highly doubt we do. And I'm not saying that portion of the bill doesn't have merit. I think it's worth trying, but to put a deadline on it, I think is just kind of adding word salad to the bill. So my motion would be to strike lines 6 through 8 on page 5 and then renumber.
I'll second for discussion. I think you've heard the merits of that. I don't know where a date hurts. It makes them get it out the door. I think they'd get it out the door anyway. So I don't know that it really matters. I have no. Senator Von Flater.
So, Mr. Chairman, it does say the Department of Transportation shall seek approval from the governor to proceed under Section 2 of this act not later than May 1st. If we don't put that date in there, they could go on forever and wait till 2022 or 23 before they actually ask the governor. We're telling them by May 1st, you need to ask the governor.
Chairman Lindholm.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, technically, I guess to that point, technically we've already got approval from the governor if he signs it into law, though.
Chairman Landon, did you have a?
Chairman, I guess I'm kind of with the chairman of transportation. I think having a hard and fast deadline to say, let's get after this, and by May 1st, we want to hear that you've sought and obtained the approval of the governor, and away we go with our request. I think we all know that we probably don't have a great chance of a favorable reaction from our brothers back in the Beltway, but honestly, I think the date doesn't hurt. I think I'll vote against the amendment. Thanks.
Senator Von Flater, and anything further?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Any further comments? So the amendment is to strike 6 through 8. All those in favor, raise your hand. Motion fails. Are there any other amendments on page 5 or 6? Okay, if not, Mr. Fuller, I guess a roll call vote on 21 LSO 0195.
Yep. Senator Dockstetter. Senator Landon.
Aye.
Senator Von Flater.
Aye.
Speaker Harshman.
Aye.
Representative Lindholm.
Aye.
Ms. Hardesty.
Aye.
Ms. Janefeld.
Aye.
Ms. Sessions.
Aye.
Chairman Summers.
Aye.
Motion carries,
And-
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And this bill, I'm going to send to the good chairs of corporations. So I'm going to make that an independent bill, and they can clean it up and fix it if it needs fixed. So, all right, with that, I am going to go to our next bill, which is, I got to get my stuff in line here. This is 21 LSO 196 version 0.2 state lands fees. Mr. Fuller.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this language comes directly from 21 LSO 19 without change. And this is the bill draft that specifies the limits and fees that can be charged for broadband and cellular towers that are on state lands and school trust lands. Just to run through this again quickly, On page 2, lines 2 through 12 are definitions of broadband infrastructure and cellular tower for purposes of the section. Page 2, line 14, this states that no fees, rents, or other charges that exceed 1% of the reasonable market-based rate can be charged or collected for the use of state lands or state or school trust lands from any person who constructs broadband infrastructure or a cellular tower on those lands, with the following conditions. So page 2, line 21, no construction can take place without an application to the Board of Land Commissioners. Moving on to page 3, the construction and operation of that equipment must be in accordance with law. And then paragraph 3 on page 3, line 8, the broadband infrastructure or cellular tower must be constructed and maintained for the benefit of Wyoming residents, students, and businesses if it's on state lands, and public schools and students if constructed on school trust lands. Paragraph 4, page 3, line 17, just provides that any damage, any person who causes damage is liable for them in the installation of infrastructure or broadband towers. And then, Mr. Chairman, the staff comment on page 4, this is just a repeat of the staff comment that came from the version back in June. And it's really an open question of how these provisions would be implicated in the provision that basically limits the amount of fees and rents that can be charged for the use of the lands for these purposes. There's not a lot of case law that interprets these provisions. The only cases that I found that discuss them are a case in South. So really, these lands are granted to the state for the support of common schools. And they're not lands that are granted outright to the state, but they're held in trust. So really the state is a trustee of these lands. And so the question would be, by limiting the lease amount, is the state, are we somehow causing the state to not uphold its fiduciary duty as trustee of those lands? And there's not a lot of case law that really gets into this. A case in South Dakota suggested the beneficiaries don't include the general public. And then the Wyoming Supreme Court has stated in a case, not directly applicable to this situation, but that the Board of Land Commissioners would have deference in managing those lands to the greatest benefit of the state. So those constitutional provisions, that is just in there to highlight a possible issue that may come up with this bill and with the changes that are being made here.
And Mr. Fuller, and on page 3, Romanet 3, we kind of line out the benefit. This is to benefit students in public schools. I think if you can't show that, then maybe you aren't constitutional, but if you can show that, maybe you are. So isn't that the reason we put that in there, Mr. Fuller?
And Mr. Chairman, sure. And the one thing I would add to that actually is that without that construction being tied to a benefit, it can't take place. So that's kind of, that is the intent of that language, is to help address that potential issue.
The only other thing that's not in here that I think we ought to contemplate, now or later, and that is, we just kind of put the feet to the fire of counties and towns and YDOT to get permitting out in a timely manner. If we do move this forward, maybe we want to make sure that state lands gets that permit out in a timely manner as well. I guess, any questions of Mr. Fuller before I go to public comment on this bill? I don't see any. So I think it looks like public comment. It looks like Ms. Zerga and Ms. Levin are in. So maybe I'll change it up and go to Ms. Levin first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually don't have comments on this bill.
Thank you. Ms. Zerga.
Mr. Chairman, it indicates my video cannot start.
Well, we can certainly hear you, Ms. Zerga, so if you continue, you'll be all right.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Liz Zerga on behalf of Wyoming Telecommunications Association. The one comment I have, and it's something to consider, and it is on the language that is referenced on page 3, lines 8 through 12. That's where you are trying to meet the constitutional requirements that this is for the benefit of the public. And what I would suggest is that you think about this language. It broadens it slightly and I think improves it, but I leave it to you. So after the word maintained on line 9, you would strike is for the benefit of and insert the word benefits. And then on subsection A, you add the state of Wyoming, comma, and then the rest of the language, except you strike and put or. And what that does is it says that a project may benefit the state of Wyoming, and that is sufficient benefit. So it's a little less restrictive, and yet I think it would still meet the constitutional requirements.
And in general, Ms. Zerga, what's your opinion on the bill? Good, bad, really does nothing?
Mr. Chairman, I think this bill may move the needle in a small way on things. It's not a big lift in any sense, but I think it might move the needle on some projects, possibly, by reducing the fees. So I'm fine with it.
Thank you. Mr. Fuller? Mr. Fuller, thank you. And just we'll discuss it obviously when we work the bill, but is for the benefit of versus benefits, does that matter as far as what we need to have to meet constitutional muster? Does that change that?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if I see much difference in that. I will say using the verb benefits is far more direct. So I think ultimately what language is used there, the key word is having benefit in there one way or another.
Okay, thank you. And then Mr. Fuller, do we have anybody else that wanted to testify on this bill? I don't see anybody. State Lands never showed up, or did they?
Mr. Chairman, we have not heard from them.
All right, well, with that, I guess I will close public comment. And committee, what's your pleasure on the bill?
Move the bill.
Moved, is there a second? Seconded by Chairman Landon. General comments before we work the bill? None. Okay, we'll go directly to it. Page 1, any changes? Page 2. Page 3. Chairman Lindholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to adopt the proposed amendments from Ms. Zerga instead of restating them. I think everybody.
I'll second. And I believe that is Romanet 3 would now read the broadband infrastructure or cellular tower constructed and maintained benefits. And then in big A, it would start out the state of Wyoming, comma, Wyoming residents, and then I believe it goes to an or. Brian, is that kind of what you have?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. I've got on line 9, delete is for the benefit of, insert benefits. After the A, state of Wyoming, and then change the and to an or.
Okay, that is the amendment. Any comments on the amendment? All those in favor, raise your hand. Motion passes. The only other thing, Chairman Lindholm, and if this goes to your committee, you can fix it then. The only other thing is if, I think as this bill moves forward, we need to think about making sure that the permitting is in a timely manner like we did in the bill before. And so I don't know that we have to do it now, but I think eventually I'll send, if this bill passes the committee, then I'll probably send it to you guys in corpse and you can kind of conform it to whatever you figure out in the last bill in a way. Okay, are there any other comments on this? Let's continue through. I think we got page 5, we have section 2 and any comments there? Section 6, page 6, section 3, any comments there? If not, we're at the end of the bill. Any further comments?
Question.
Oh, Chairman Landon.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to slow it down here, but I thought your comments were spot on with regard to that time frame that we've talked about this morning. I wonder if we don't want to clean this bill up before we send it to whatever committee. And we could do that maybe with a conceptual amendment, or maybe Mr. Fuller has a better idea. I was looking, I just couldn't really find a spot to put that that time frame element into the bill. But what do you think, Mr. Chairman? Should we clean it up now?
Mr. Fuller, could we put that time frame that we brought in before back into this bill, kind of a double time frame?
Mr. Chairman, are you talking about the 10 days, 20 days?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Fuller.
Mr. Chairman, I could work that in here. The one thing I would ask is, if there's any other provision regarding the permitting, that basically there's leeway and latitude to make conforming amendments as necessary.
I'm certainly good with Chairman Landon. Is that a motion that you would make then? Does that?
Mr. Chairman, that is a motion, and it would include the thoughts that Mr. Fuller just shared, and give him the purview to construct it properly. And then I'm sure that the Corporations Committee could take a good look when we get there.
Second by Dockstetter. Any comments on the amendment? All those in favor, raise your hand. Motion passes. And that'll go to corporations as well. And I think just a general question to the task force, and particularly I think and I'm going to really lean on Chairman's Landon and Lindholm. Would you rather see that in one bill or two bills?
I think this, Mr. Chairman, I think my personal opinion would be one bill, but I don't know where Chairman Landon.
So if that's the case, Chairman Landon, would you make that motion that we combine those two into one bill?
Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to make that motion and go along with my good co-chair. And if those can be combined to present them to corporations, that would be my motion.
I'll second that motion. And Mr. Fuller, Alan goes with that.
Mr. Chairman, and this is just, I guess, a rehash of when we first discussed back in June, all of these concepts placed in a single bill. The question would arise is whether this would meet the requirements of a bill being a single subject. The previous version was fashioned as state broadband support. And while that, while both of these bill drafts, are geared toward that aim, that is certainly a question for this task force and the legislature to consider as it moves forward with these concepts.
Chairman Landon.
Mr. Chairman, sitting here, I really appreciate those thoughts from Mr. Fuller. And you know what? I think I'm going to withdraw the motion and maybe encourage the co-chairman to, I think some of this stuff is a little bit of a lift. And it might actually expedite, Mr. Co-Chairman, to present this in two different bills rather than trying to lump them together and wade our way through quite a bit of material that we've spent this interim on. So, maybe we're okay with two bills, Mr. Chairman.
All right. it's the motion. There's been he rescinded his motion, so that is off the table. Anything else on these two bills? If not, I think what we'll do is we'll do one more bill, and then we'll break for lunch. And so I guess, Mr. Fuller, the next bill is 21 LSO 198.3, Department of Transportation Communication Facilities.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this also comes from the previous version of the bill draft. It also includes a couple of changes at your direction, as I'll note as we work through the bill. So jumping in, page 2, line 2, one of the first changes in this version of the bill is reinsertion of the term telecommunications company. If you'll recall, the previous version struck that and limited it to broadband provider. So this goes back to that original term of telecommunications company. Then on lines 3 through 5, it strikes a reference basically that required the Public Service Commission to kind of check off that this would be to provide service to an unserved area. And then lines 9 through 13 strikes basically the definition of what an unserved area is for purposes of this section. Page 2, line 13, currently the rate of the lease for excess capacity on infrastructure facilities is the reasonable market-based rate. This inserts language on line 14 that says that the rate can't exceed 25% of the reasonable market-based rate, or for the provision, moving to line 16, for the provision of in-kind services as negotiated by the department. The next change begins on line 22 into line 23 and strikes rulemaking for the Public Service Commission to implement this section. And then, Mr. Chairman, on page 3, instead of any monies or proceeds received from leases going to the general fund, they would be placed in a newly created WyoLink Tower Maintenance account, the funds of which would be continuously appropriated and used only for the purpose of maintaining, reinforcing, and repairing WyoLink towers in Wyoming. New subsection B on page 3, beginning line 9. This is the speed requirement and the latency requirement that was in the previous version of the bill. So 25.3 speeds and 100 millisecond latency. And then, Mr. Chairman, the definition makes clear on the top of page 4 that a telecommunications company is a broadband provider, and then defines what a broadband provider is. And this is based on language that was provided to the task force and approved for inclusion in 21 LSO 19. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to stand for questions.
Mr. Fuller, just I'll give everybody a little background on this. If you all remember, YDOT followed a different protocol really that was in statute. And so we're in the process, this is really kind of trying to clean it up, and maybe not exactly how they would have cleaned it up. I don't know, we'll probably hear testimony on that. But certainly it was to clean up statute to follow what they're currently doing. The one other piece in here that I think probably needs to go, in my opinion, is on line 17, starting with no, the sentence starting with no, and then ending on line 22 with the period. No telecommunication company may lease excess capacity on a communication infrastructure owned by the department, unless the telecommunication establishes that excess capacity in that area is unavailable from private. So this basically goes through a whole process that I don't even know that they're using, that requires you to check and see if the private towers have room, and that the state's not unfairly letting people on. And I really think that needs deleted, but I would be interested in comment on that. So that's what this was about. Any questions of Brian before I bring in the agency? I don't see any, and so either the general or director, or Mr. Babbitt, I'm going to bring in YDOT and let you all comment, whoever would like to comment. Mr. Babbitt, do I have you?
Mr. Chairman, I am here. I see the director just unmuted as well.
Okay, Director, please, if you have comments on this bill.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was just, I thought I'd let Mr. Babbitt go first, and then I'll make some comments later if appropriate.
Thank you, Director. Mr. Babbitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we do have a couple of just comments, general comments. On page 1, line 12, Department of Transportation Communications Facilities. Over the years, that is kind of a little bit of a hybrid situation. Some of those are state-owned and some of those are federally owned. So it's not all encompassing one or the other per se. So just want to make note that I would think we certainly could do much more with the state-owned facilities. Other federally would cause some challenges for the agency. And then the only other comment I have goes to page 3, line 7.
Just a second, Mr. Babbitt. Thank you. So currently we have a statute that's in place and that you have a policy that's in place and it already, that already exists. So we haven't said state or federal before, and you've been doing whatever you've been doing. Is there a specific cleanup that we would need to make your practice, represent the statute represent your practice better? And if so, do you have an idea where we might do that?
Mr. Chairman, you are correct. With the current 16 towers that are under construction right now, those were utilized using federal funds. So we are in territory that we had never gone through before. So as we're trying to work out those details, the way the federal government takes a look at that FHWA is any funds or that possibly could be leased back needs to go directly back onto the highways.
So Mr. Babbitt, if we went to page 2 and did something like on line 7, and I'll just back up to read it, the Wyoming Department shall lease excess capacity on any state of Wyoming communication infrastructure facility, or is it already covered because it says or facility owned by Department of Transportation? So help me out here. Do we even need that, or is that clear enough? Or
Mr. Chairman, I do like your recommendation of still putting in the state. I see what you're saying, but in a sense, even the federal ones could be looked upon as owned by the agency. I would recommend that the word state is put in there, state infrastructure.
All right, thank you, Mr. Babb. Please continue.
Okay, 2 and page 3, when we talk about the WildLink towers, line 7, recommendation to maintain, reinforce, and repair the WildLink towers in Wyoming. First suggestion after the WildLink, it certainly restricts us to only being able to put any additional funds onto existing infrastructure on the towers per se. We would like to, for consideration, say the WildLink network or towers, period. And then we do have 3 additional towers that actually sit in other states. We have one in Colorado and we have 2 in Idaho. So just to make sure that we don't exclude working on those particular locations.
And so, Mr. Babbitt, that'd be down on line 7, perhaps?
Correct, sir.
Okay, and Brian, you kind of got that noted. So when we come back to it, if we do, thank you. Mr. Babbitt, how are you?
Mr. Chairman, that concludes mine. I'd hand it over to the director.
Director?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Babbitt. Hey, Mr. Babbitt covered it. It's certainly in support of this, and with those small technical corrections, fully on board. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys taking a look at it and providing comment back. Are there any questions of the department? Ms. Sessions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to just ask a clarifying question. On line 7 and again on 18 and 19 on page 2, we talk about communication infrastructure or facility. I know we're making the assumption that we're just talking about towers here, but could that be read to also mean facilities in the ground?
So
I guess where I'm.
let me ask this of well, first, Brian, what does the bill actually say, and then we'll go to the department to find out what they're currently doing. So please, Mr. Fuller.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Ms. Sessions, the language is currently in statute. Infrastructure facility doesn't specify towers. So presumably it could be any communication infrastructure or facility that the Department of Transportation has.
Ms. Sessions.
Just to follow up, when we talked about striking 17 through 19 on page 2, I think we just need to be careful about that, because I think the spirit of that was intended to cover more than just tower facilities.
Fair enough. I think that's a good note, and maybe why it was left in and never wasn't stricken before. So good catch. Mr. Babbitt, do you guys, lease any excess? You currently could lease any excess capacity in any fiber you own right now, right? I mean, it says that you shall right now.
Mr. Chairman, we do not own any fiber per se. As we've worked with telecoms in the past, and the whole concept of putting the conduit into the right of ways, whoever is the first internet service provider into the trench is typically the owner, and partnership and the leasing works with those other companies. We in fact do not own that infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions of the department? Not, all right. Thank you guys. And now I'm going to go to public comment. I see. I'll go to Ms. Zerga first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Liz Zerga on behalf of Wyoming Telecom Association. I didn't have any comment on the original bill. I would agree with Ms. Sessions that you do not want to eliminate 17 through 22. Part of the reason this was a narrower statute is it required a telecom company to go through the PSC to find that it was necessary. Once we open this up to broadband, you need to be very careful that you're not using state-owned facilities to undercut pricing where private facilities are available for lease to other providers. So I completely agree with Ms. Sessions. You don't want to eliminate lines 17 through 22 on page 2.
So Ms. Zerga, my question back to you is, what about towers versus other? Because in my opinion, even if a private company has a tower out there, I don't know that you need to go through the whole process to find out whether it's available and what's available or unavailable. You can say it's available at a cost that nobody can use. So how do you handle that?
Mr. Chairman, currently, if there are multiple towers occupying a hill, which is not uncommon, and one of those happens to be a WildLink tower, the applicant in this case would go to those other towers and find out if there was space available from a private commercial facility, and would then, if there was, would be precluded from applying for a WildLink tower at this reduced rate. And many of those, a lot of towers are shared nowadays. A lot of towers are shared. My companies share space. They have towers, they open them. Other companies have towers, they share space. We have trading back and forth. We have leases. It's a commodity that if there's a tower there, unless it's completely full, in which case there would be no space available, those towers are a commodity that are leased and made available.
Yeah, but at what cost? So I understand the fiber piece, but the tower piece, I guess I have heartburn with. But we'll debate that. Certainly understand your point, Ms. Zerga.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions of Ms. Zerga? If not, I will go to Ms. Levin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have comments on this bill.
All right, thank you. Is that, Brian, is that all? Is that all I have?
That's correct.
All right. With that, committee, who would like to move the bill, or would
Move the
anybody like to?
bill, please, Mr. Chairman.
It's been moved by Von Flateren and seconded by Representative Harshman. Committee, any comments, or should we just delve right into it? I think it's simple enough. We can just delve right into it. Page 1, any changes? Page 2, Senator Von Flateren.
Mr. Chairman, on page 2, line 7, it should say state-owned communications infrastructure. That's my amendment, is to put state-owned communication infrastructure.
I'll second that amendment. Any discussion on that? Brian, if we do something that doesn't technically look correct, let us know or fix our problem later.
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thanks. All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. Motion passes. And then, continuing on page 2, I guess the committee's heard I'm not going to make my own motion, but I understand their concern, particularly with fiber, state-owned fiber. But as it relates to a state-owned tower, I think that ought to be open for whoever to use. And so I'm just asking the committee to consider that. If we want to change what's in statute right now, we can. If nobody wants to do it, we'll leave it as it is. Looks like we are going to leave it. I'll make that argument if we get that far in session. All right. So on any more on page 2?
Mr. Chairman, real quick, given the change on line 6 and 7, the insertion of state-owned, whether that change you would also want to see included on line 18.
I believe so, Mr. Fuller. I think that would be correct. And then page 3, thank you, Senator Von Flateren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On line 7, after WiLink, put network or towers, period. And no in Wyoming.
Is there a second on that? Second by Senator Landon. Any debate? All those in favor signify by raising your hand. Motion passes. Anything else on page 3? Anything on page 4? Barb, Ms. Sessions, are we all good with that definition being there at that time for internet provider? That's probably correct, right? Okay. All right. Sounds good. Thank you. Any other comments on the bill? Not, roll call.
Senator Dockstader. I'm sorry, Senator, I didn't. Okay. Thumbs up from Senator Dockstader. Senator Landon.
Aye.
Senator Von Flateren.
Aye.
Speaker Harshman.
Aye.
Representative Lindholm.
Aye.
Ms. Hardesty.
Aye.
Ms. Shanefield.
Excused.
Ms. Sessions.
Aye.
Chairman Summers.
Aye.
Motion carries, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chairman Von Flateren, do you still have a transportation meeting or not?
No, I don't, sir.
Okay, thank you. I'll just hold this and see where Chairman Landon and Chairman Lindholm, I'll check and see how tight your schedule is. We could run this through Management Council if we need to. You know, you might have your plates full with what all you have. So keep me posted on how your bill count's stacking up and whether you want to see another bill or not. All right.
Mr. Chairman, we don't ever seem on corporation to have any problem generating bills. And so that said, we have added that third day in November. So hopefully we can work a couple of these broadband bills. So thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we're only at 22 bills so far, so adding another 4 or 5 is fine.
All right, sounds good, Chairman Lindholm, sounds good. All right, you know, I was gonna quit right here, but I got a little text and said, hey, do we even, you know, the last bill, if you take a look at it, and I think I'll just have Brian run through it. Well, I'll just run through it really quickly and not get into the details. So really what this is doing is going into CARES Act funding and making recommendations. And I think we heard at the top of the hour really there that when we started that the governor's office was working on all of these in some way, shape, or form. And, you know, the one person I would ask would be Ms. Hardesty. Do you feel comfortable that your concerns and the route that they're going, it looks like you might be in a workable project on telehealth?
Yeah, no, I think there's good progress. I mean, the only thing, and this is in discussion related to this bill, is to think not just about schools that are receiving the services, but the primary care providers who are linking in or potentially urgent care insert another healthcare provider. So I feel that is part of the discussion, but just to add in one of the additional perspectives related to this consideration.
Thank you. And the other one is the routers in schools, and it seemed like they were working on that. And I guess Speaker Harshman, this was kind of your go-to one. So, and you're the one that texted me. So my question, I guess, to you is, do you want to work this bill or do you want to let it play out?
You know, Mr. Chairman, it's another horse in the race that probably isn't going to finish. It sounds like the other one's way out front and going to win, coming from the executive branch, doing most of this. It probably doesn't hurt. I think the bill is actually in perfect shape, doesn't need any amendments. Roll right through, and we can probably just approve it. And it'll probably never see the light of day or another committee because I think it's being done. But I don't think it hurts because I don't think any of us can predict the future. I mean, the one part in there about the corrections institutions in the state, I didn't hear an update. Maybe that's being done. That was an efficiency commission recommendation. So I don't think it hurts to keep the thing rolling, but I don't think we need to spend much of our life working it over here in the next few minutes.
And Mr. Speaker, my understanding is that they are currently doing that in corrections now, that they've implemented a telehealth program in the prison. So at your request, we will work this. So Brian, run us through the bill. I think we can get her done one way or the other fairly quickly.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so I'll just jump right in. Page 2 are a number of definitions that apply. CARES Act. The one definition I will spend a minute on is page 2, line 5, and that's the covered period. And the idea behind that paragraph is that if Congress comes along and amends the deadline for expenditure of the CARES Act funds that the state has received, covered period, as it's used throughout the bill draft, will include that later date. So that is the purpose of having that definition there. And then there are definitions for department, telehealth, telehealth cart. Some of these come from a bill that Joint Appropriations, I believe, had before it in its meeting in August as well. So page 3, line 6, This reappropriates CARES Act funds for the following 3 programs. And on page 3, line 15 is $5 million for the telehealth cards in the school districts. That would be provided on a first come, first served basis. Page 4, line 7 is $200,000 for telehealth cards for state correctional facilities, 1 telehealth card per facility. Page 4, line 21 is $1.3 million for the outdoor wireless internet access point at each school facility in the state. Page 5, line 15 just specifies that the funds would come from an account if one has been named. It's the appropriation has to be consistent with federal law, and then before November 15th, basically calculate if any funds would be left over, and if so, those would be reappropriated back to the governor's office for expenditure before the deadline. The one thing I would note, Mr. Chairman, is that these appropriations and the entity responsible for that would be ETS. So ETS would be responsible for coordinating the procurement and installation and acquisition of any of this necessary equipment. With that, Mr. Chairman, happy to answer any questions.
Summers had to leave, so open it up for any questions from the committee.
Motion on the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Okay,
Or public comment.
we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Maybe public
We
comment.
need to have public comment.
Sorry.
So I can't see everybody who's there, so. Oh, there it is. Liz Zerga, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Liz Zerga on behalf of Wyoming Telecom Association. The only comment I have on the bill, I think it's a good bill. It's one that's been worked a lot. In appropriations, Chairman Summers had a small amendment, and I don't see that it made its way into this bill. And I would put it on page 5, line 13. And I don't have the exact language in front of me, so I'll tell you what the concept is. The concept is you don't want to use CARES Act money for wireless internet access points for use by the community that would cause ETS to lose its federal universal service funds. So there are some limitations on the federal universal service funds. And so the amendment would be that it would be used, this money would be used, but it would comply with the federal universal service fund limitation. And what that allows the internet access points to be used for is it can always be used by the students in the school. But for the public, there are some restrictions in the federal universal service funds, and you just don't want to cause ETS to lose its federal universal service funds. So that's the concept. I know the language was already drafted. I think Chairman Summers is familiar with it. I think Mr. Speaker's familiar with it and that's the concept.
Now the chair who's familiar with it is back, so go ahead, Chairman Summers.
Thank you. Did you hear that, Chairman Summers?
I didn't, Ms. Zerga, thank you. And I was struggling before the meeting. I was talking to Brian, Mr. Fuller. We had that language and I couldn't get my hands on it. I needed to do it, and Mr. Fuller has it in his notes as well. So we'll do a conceptual amendment and get it right.
Thank you, Mr.
The idea
Chairman.
is that I know my internet's unstable. The idea is that those outside routers should not jeopardize that federal funding, and so that's the basis of what will be an amendment. So,
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any more questions of Ms. Zerga?
And Mr.
If not,
Chairman.
I know Mr. Fuller.
Oh, my apologies, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to say at the appropriate time, I do have language drafted if the task force so desires.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. I know my internet's kind of bouncing right now. If there's no questions of Ms. Zerga, thank you. Are there any other public comment? So Ms. Levin is the only one left standing, I think, or sitting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have comments on this bill either.
All right, thank you, Ms. Levin. Public comment, anybody else, Brian, just so I don't miss somebody.
Mr. Chairman, I noticed Mr. Babbitt's still in the room. I don't know if he had comment on this bill or not.
Mr. Babbitt?
Mr. Chairman, we do not. No comments from Whiteout. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'll close public comment. Committee, did we have a motion and a second? I think I better start over. Is there a motion? Motion by Landon, second by Harshman. I'm just going to walk through the bill, and Mr. Fuller, when we get to that point where you see that appropriate amendment, just pop in, will you?
Will do, Mr. Chairman.
All right, any changes to page 1? Page 2? Page 3, 2, Ms. Hardesty.
Mr. Chairman, one of the things I'd like us to consider is the definition of telehealth cart. If I could propose that that's telehealth equipment, such as or including integrated audiovisual equipment, software, displays, and network. We're at the point in our technology that we would hate to limit the kind of telehealth equipment that schools could purchase because the combined carts, as it's mentioned here, have the potential to go out of date fairly quickly. However, there are quite a bit of other peripherals or other things that can actually be purchased at a lower cost that would make it more flexible for schools to identify what they need.
Second.
Great.
It's been moved and seconded, although I'm not quite sure what's been moved and seconded. So, Mr. Fuller, I'm going to bring you in. And so you want to broaden this, is that correct, Ms. Hardesty? Would that be to account for future technologies?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if we could just make it telehealth equipment and then make that change throughout the entire bill. CART just in the telehealth world has a specific connotation.
So to be telehealth equipment instead of CART. So is simpler than I understood there. Okay. Yeah. That's the motion and the second. Any comment? All those in favor, raise your hand. Motion carries. All right. Any further changes on page 3? Page 4.
Mr. Chairman, if I may interject, in light of that change, I think there would need to be something done to the sentence on page 4, line 13. This is for the Department of Corrections, and right now it just says only one telehealth card to each state correctional facility, and that sentence could be deleted or some other provision that just limits it to one item. I'm not sure how exactly the task force would want to phrase that, but I did just want to highlight that sentence.
Committee, I think the limiter on our bill is the amount of money. So I don't know that there's a necessity for that language at all. Did Chairman or Speaker Harshman?
Mr. Chairman, I'd just make a motion to delete that sentence. Not less than one telehealth card shall be allocated to each state correctional facility. Just delete it. It's not needed.
Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Hardesty. All those in favor, raise your hand. Motion carries. Any further changes on page 4? Obviously, there'll be a conforming change on page 4 at the top. Where, in line 2, telehealth carts will go to something else, but Brian, you'll catch all of those, I'm sure. Okay. Page 5 is where I would assume we would put that amendment. Is that right, Mr. Fuller, or not?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. I believe it could be placed on page 5, line 10, after community period.
Okay, could you read that, what that language might be?
Mr. Chairman, this is what I drafted. It would be the acquisition and installation of outdoor wireless internet access points under this paragraph shall comply with the provisions of the Federal Universal Service Schools and Libraries Program.
Okay, is there a motion on that?
So moved.
It's moved by Harshman, second by Von Flater. Any comments?
Question.
All those in favor, raise your hand. Motion passes. Anything else on 5? 6. All right. Any general comments? If not, Representative Lindholm, Chairman Lindholm.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to note that I'm still not in favor of this legislation, specifically, well, really both parts. The cart situation, we took no testimony. Maybe somebody else did at some time from the school districts, from Department of Corrections, those types of folks saying that these little carts would be real handy. I haven't even seen one of these carts or know what they look like. And we're going to provide funds for them if this even goes anywhere. And then number 2, the access points. I was under the impression last time I brought this up that these wireless access points were going to be for, basically kids to be able to do teleeducation. It was their primary deal, because I brought up the fact that there's certain members of community that cannot go within a certain amount of feet or yards within a school due to their criminal history. But yet we see in the bill that its intent is for capabilities for students, families, and the community. And so there is a group of people that will not be able to access these community hotspots because of their placement at a school facility. So, but just the same, it doesn't sound like she's going anywhere. I'm still going to vote no.
Senator Dockstader, did you have your hand up or not? You're still muted. It might be another mute.
Show's unmuted.
You're good now.
Okay.
You're good now.
All right. It's a slow reaction. I think it's still needed in there as a placeholder. We sense, and we probably know, that everything's going to be taken care of with the work that's going on now and perhaps some additional work. But nonetheless, I think we still need it in there as a placeholder for our schools.
Thank you, Senator Dockstader. Any other comments? Not, do I hear a question? Question on the bill. Roll call.
Senator Dockstader. Senator Landon.
Aye.
Senator Von Flater.
Aye.
Speaker Harshman. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Aye.
Representative Lindholm.
No.
Ms. Hardesty.
Aye.
Ms. Shanefield.
Excused.
Ms. Sessions.
No.
Chairman Summers.
Aye.
Motion carries, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Just a note on that bill, we'll hold it, kind of see where it goes, and then I'll make a decision if we issue it to the committee. Chairman Lindholm.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to volunteer my committee, corporations, to see that piece of legislation also. We'll do a good job with it.
Chairman Lindholm, I'm pretty sure you're too full for that bill. I'm not going to get many opportunities in public to thank you, Chairman Lindholm, for your service and for your service as it relates to technology, which is what this committee's been about. And so I want to really thank you for your service on these committees that have dealt with technology and the effort that you've put into that over the course of your career thus far. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Geekiest cowboy in the legislature, I'm pretty sure.
Damn straight. All right, is there any other thing for the good of the order? This will be our last meeting. Chairman Harshman, or Speaker Harshman.
Thank you. And again, Representative Lindholm, Chairman Lindholm, and Chairman Von Flatern, really have been a pleasure serving with you two gentlemen. And the state
Absolutely.
is better off because of your service. And appreciate, you know, Senator Von Flatern, your work in Campbell County, lifetime of work, employed hundreds of people, built successful businesses, and done a lot of good for the people as a state senator. And same with you, Representative Lindholm. All the blockchain work, all those things are going to change the future for Wyoming. So really appreciate you, gentlemen, and I know it's in your heart. You'll continue to serve your communities and our state. So again, just really appreciative of you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Speaker. Appreciate it.
All right, and like I said, this will be the last meeting of this task force in all likelihood. I'm not going to close out the option for something else, but I think we've got it pretty well wrapped up. I appreciate the people of Wyoming engaging. I appreciate the providers that have provided service to the state of Wyoming and will continue to provide more service. And I can't emphasize enough how important getting broadband to everybody in the state of Wyoming is. And I just think it's critical for our future. So thank you all, and thank you for your time. Those that, Ms. Sessions, Ms. Hardesty, Ms. Schoenfeld, we appreciate your service on this task force as well. So thank you. Anybody else for the good of the order? Not, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.